the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome, 3 minutes after 1, by the way. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Julia. Back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Busy one on the programme. Keir Starmer backs plans to slash civil servant numbers. Rachel Reeves targeting £2 billion worth of savings by 2030. Starmer says it's about cutting costs and improving services. Unions are not convinced. No, they are in tears at the moment, discombobulating by the hour, it seems. We'll have more on that in a couple of moments. Also this afternoon, Heathrow Airport facing a backlash after 200,000 passengers were stranded during Friday's power chaos. The National Grid says actually the airport did have enough electricity. Turns out, by the way, while the fire burned, the boss of Heathrow went to bed. You can't make this stuff up. And also this afternoon, facial recognition cameras are coming to the UK high streets on a permanent basis, starting in Croydon this summer. The Met Police says it's a win for public safety, but critics warn of privacy concerns. How relaxed are you about having your fizzog constantly photographed over there in Croydon? If that is your neck of the woods, of course. Yeah, but it will, of course, catch on around other towns in the country. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Straightforward question. Where would you slash spending? And there's some obvious areas here. I think there's actually a deeper, without sounding too worthy about this, a deeper sort of philosophical way of looking at this. Ministers are drawing up plans to axe 5 times as many civil servant jobs as previously planned. This is Rachel Reeves, who's gearing up for her big statement on Wednesday this week. She's on a collision course with unions over this. She's trying to balance the book, and the Chancellor has announced that she would cut up to £2 billion worth of government running costs by 2030. I know why stuff takes 5 years to do. Now, that cut, we've been crunching the numbers at this end, equates to 15% of the government's £13 billion a year admin budget, of which more than 3/4 is spent on staff. There will be losers in this. We also hear that the cuts are likely to reduce the size of the civil service, but are you ready for this? By up to 50,000 jobs. That's 5 times more than the government had previously mooted on this point. Now, if you can afford, and I don't mean financially, but if you can function with 50,000 fewer people in the system, then that tells you quite a lot about where we were. You probably didn't need the extra 50,000. You could probably go further. But you know what? The problem is bigger. It's a problem with government, whether it's this lot, the last lot, the lot before, or the lot before that. This move should not be an emergency measure. This should be how we run government anyway. This lot, like all of the others, are devoid of that, I'm going to use the word again, that core philosophy on how things should work. They all operate from a kind of outdated template of groupthink and cosy agreements. Anyone who cares to take a cursory look at how governments function can see this kind of stuff. No one ever questions seriously. They'll talk about growth and saving money. They're used as these sort of vacuous platitudes that are wheeled out by Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dem. Everybody claims this kind of growth thing. And you're never going to get it, by the way, if you're taxing people out of their own socks. So that's not going to happen. But also, if you have an overinflated public system within the civil service, in the 21st century, when we largely work in a very digital age, by the way, no one's going to tell me you need the same amount of people working in the Ministry of Defence as you needed during the war. And I bet you we've got more, probably loads more. That's just one department. We work in a very different way in terms of efficiency, but no one down there at Civil Service HQ appeared to get the message. It's not just the civil service. I mean, the amount of money that is wasted in government is utterly phenomenal. And I'm sure if you had David Cameron sitting here, or Boris Johnson, or Blair, or Brown, they would say, yeah, it always looks like that. We don't set out to waste the money. I think you do. I think by definition of how governments function in this country, it's a crime scene. And by definition, you will waste money. All the while, you're working on the same basis because you're not functioning on a day-to-day, how can we make this slicker? How can we make it more efficient? Secretly, all of those politicians love hordes of people working in all of those departments. They love a vanity project. They love a couple of tickets to go and see Sabrina Carpenter over there at Wembley. They love all of that stuff. So don't let anybody tell you they don't, because this is how government has functioned. Now, over in the States at the moment, the DOGE department under Elon Musk is having a bit of a time, taking the scythe to government spending, taxpayers' money, of course. Apparently, they got a few things a little wrong. I think Elon got a bit excited over there. But broadly speaking, when you consider some of the things that within days that they cut and said, we're not spending money on this. Julia was just talking there about, what was it, free money for foreign students to do something or other. I just caught the tail end of it. Why would you have that there? Why would that be a thing? And there's loads of examples of this. Where would you slash spending? 0344 499 1000. If that was your task, you were given that impressive abacus of financial joy to sit there and count the beans and work it out. You've got a big pie chart, you've got a spreadsheet, someone's giving you an impressive quill with which to write your little impressive mathematic notes. All of that going, where would you start? Where would you slash the cash when it comes to saving money and spending? 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Simon Danczuk, former Labour MP, now defected to Reform, is with us. Afternoon to you, Simon.
Good afternoon. It's good to be with you.
Always good to have you with us. And, of course, we are talking here to start with about the spring statement, not a budget, of course. Don't call it a budget. It's a very bad thing. It's just a statement of sorts. Keir Starmer has pledged to cut spending. Ministers planning deeper civil service cuts. Rachel Reeves insisting they can reduce 10,000 jobs to save £2 billion. Let's have a listen to her talking on this very point.
I'm confident that we can reduce civil service numbers by 10,000. And during COVID, there were big increases in the number of people who were working in the civil service. That was the right thing to do to respond to those challenges. But it's not right that we just keep those numbers there forever, because they haven't been cut back since COVID, despite the fact that the world has changed since then.
And there is some evidence, Simon, that it could be up to 50,000 jobs. And I said at the beginning, if this lot can afford to lose 50,000 people, that tells you something about the 50,000 people, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. Rachel Reeves isn't making these cuts because she wants to save the British taxpayer money. She's making these cuts because she's run the economy into the ground.
Yeah.
Economic growth is predicted now to be 1% instead of 2%, which she was hoping for. Her last budget increased national insurance, taxed businesses, and they're just getting rid of staff. The businesses are shrinking across the United Kingdom. We're losing more businesses than ever before by the day. And that's put pressure on the Treasury, and they're having to make cuts. But that's the interesting point. She wouldn't make these cuts if the pressure wasn't on her. Yeah. And that's not a good way of doing government anyway, is it? It's the point that you were making, Ian. She should want to make these cuts. She should want to save the taxpayer money, but that's not what she really wants to do. And she doesn't really want to have a fight with the trade unions. But it is about efficiency. And let me just give you a quick example. I'm going to the small claims court to get some money back, and I have to pay a court fee. I have to ring up this central number, and they say to me, "You will not believe this." I said, "How do I pay the court fee?" They said, either the court can ring you back and then you pay over the phone, or you can send a postal order or a cheque. I said, this is the 21st century. I can't even remember.
Postal order? Do they still exist, postal orders?
Exactly, a postal order in the 21st century, and that's how I have to pay the court fees.
Wow.
Now, come on, this is how we run in government, and there has to be radical change. They have to get on top of this stuff, but they have to want to get on top of it. That's the key point.
Absolutely, and there is going to be a right royal row with the unions on this.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, taking 50,000 people out of the civil service. But bear in mind, we have over 500,000 people working in the civil service now. How did it get to those numbers? We just don't need that. We didn't need that many before the pandemic.
Yeah.
I know a lot more people have come into the country illegally and stuff, but surely we don't need the numbers that we've now got. So it's right to make the cuts, but I don't believe she'll make the cuts in the right place. If it was up to me, and you're asking this question quite rightly, get rid of the whole woke agenda, sack all the diversity officers, stop painting everything rainbow colours, tackle illegal immigration, get rid of the hotels bill. I mean, it's not difficult, but that's not what they'll focus on. It'll be frontline services that we lose.
Well, if you're spending £300 million every month on hotels for people who rode across the English Channel, I can't take a government seriously, Simon, until they start there, surely. I mean, that would be you haven't even got to think about that one. Hang on, 300 million, £8 million a day, upwards of that. And I mean, this is billions a year now. Very easy to address this one. They don't go anywhere near it.
No, absolutely. We need a Donald Trump approach to immigration in the United Kingdom. It's £55 million a day we spend on hotels for illegal immigrants. £55 million a day. And yet the government are talking about taking money off disabled people. And yet we're propping this up. I mean, it begs belief. People must be exceptionally unhappy about this current state of where we're at.
Yes, we look on with utter jaw-dropping amazement at some of these decisions. We'll find out on Wednesday the extent of the first phase of Boomerang Rachel's big fiscal bag of her bonanza of announcements. I don't think we're going to get any lovely, nice, happy news there. Let's move to Heathrow. Heathrow Airport's shutdown on Friday has sparked a bit of a blame game. Claims of insufficient power, claims that sufficient power was actually available to keep it open. Let's have a listen to the Secretary of State for Transport. This is Heidi Alexander speaking to talk on the situation.
The decision to cease operations at the airport for most of the day on Friday was obviously a decision taken by Heathrow Airport. It's a private company, and it was the decision of their leadership team based upon the information that they had available to them at the time. My understanding is whilst their backup power systems operated and protected some of the critical key systems within the airport, they did have to reconfigure some of the electricity supply. All the systems were turned off. They then had to start them again in a safe way and test them to make sure that they were safe.
Do you know what I think happened here, Simon? And I'm kind of going to blame COVID for this. I think the overreaction was based on that we must lock everything down, as if that's a kind of catch-all, sensible, intelligent approach to stuff. I reckon they went down that route without exploring that apparently there were two other substations that could have generated. It might not have meant that all the flights took off, because there was a fire down the road. I'm not blaming Heathrow for the fire, but actually there was availability apparently.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting analysis, the point that you make there about locking everything down immediately. By all accounts, the chief executive of the National Grid, the supplier of energy, electricity to the airport, says there were two other substations that could have provided energy. The chief executive of British Airways has come out and said they could have got planes off the ground earlier on Friday than what they did do. They barely got any off the ground by midnight on Friday. All this happened Thursday night, Friday morning. And as you say, they just completely locked down, and it looks like it was the wrong decision to make. What also concerns me, Ian, is the lack of intervention from government. I know it's all good and well Heidi, and I rate Heidi Alexander, I know her relatively well, but it's all good and well saying, oh, this is a private company. This is national infrastructure. And I don't think we've even seen the aviation minister since Thursday. We haven't seen him since before the incident. I don't know what he's doing, but we haven't seen him at all. And it's now Monday. I mean, days have gone by without any real response or intervention by government ministers. We need a better show on these issues than that.
And not just that, but Thomas Waldby, the head honcho of Heathrow, when the place was on fire, the station, and the airport was closed, Thomas went to bed. He went to bed. I mean, the absolute... I mean, there's a crisis there. One of the world's busiest airports. It's non-stop. The knock-on effect was absolutely global. Quite humiliating now for this country when you look at what we could have done and the reasons. But the top man went to bed, Simon.
Absolutely disgraceful. I don't think he'll be in his job that much longer, would be my prediction. And then he came out the day or so after saying that he's very proud in terms of how they managed to handle it. Well, he's the only one that is proud of it. I mean, as you point out, it's a national disgrace in terms of how it's been handled.
It's just incredible that we got to this stage. And then, I honestly think there's probably a name for this phenomenon. If there isn't one already, one should be coined. But the lockdown thing, that is your default reaction. There's a fire over there. We must lock down. And the National Grid CEO, John Pettigrew, is going, yeah, but you've got other options here. No, we'll lock it down, and then we're all safe. Everything's good. We are a national humiliation on this front, and will heads roll? I very much doubt it. Stay with us. Simon Danchuk, former Labour MP, now a member of Reform UK, taking a look at the big stories of the day. Throw in any comments on that, particularly, the Heathrow thing. The idea that you would go to bed. Their argument is, well, he's got a deputy, and the deputy can do it, and then in the morning, Mr. Waldby, goodbye, will be, nice and fresh and ready for all the big questions in the morning. That's, I think, their version of events. It doesn't work like that. If you're in any kind of industry and there is a disaster, I know what it's like in this industry when there's a big breaking news story. If you're about to clock off for the day, you don't clock off, you hang around. Sometimes you even come in from home. You don't even need to be asked, by the way. You just jump on a train and get into work and go, clearly, it's all hands on deck. But the CEO was, for some bizarre reason, he was getting some Z's over there at Bedroom HQ. I'm sure he had his little cuddly with him and little eye mask on. Probably has one of those things they give away on the airlines that you put round your neck. He was sleeping like a bear in this one, loving it, while the entire place was in utter chaos. And he's the main man. How'd you get that job? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
My understanding is whilst their backup power systems operated and protected some of the critical key systems within the airport, they did have to reconfigure some of the electricity supply. All the systems were turned off. They then had to start them again in a safe way. We have asked the National Energy Systems Operator to conduct a review of the incident and any wider lessons that might need to be learnt about energy resilience on our critical national infrastructure.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. 23 minutes after 1 o'clock. Simon Danchuk is with us, the former Labour MP, now member of Reform UK. I should just get a quick word, Simon, while you're with us. Reform UK have announced their candidate for the Runcorn and Helsby by-election. Date still to be confirmed. Sarah Ponchin is the candidate. She's going to be in that seat. This is a constituency that Reform feel fairly confident about. They came second, of course, at the general election.
Yeah, they came a distant second, I think 15,000 votes behind, yet they have a good chance of winning this. Yeah. It's a real test for both Labour and Reform. There's no doubt about it, there'll be a low turnout, but that could advantage Reform. And the opinion polls that have been done in the constituency so far suggest Reform will take it. People and the Sunday papers were saying that many people who would traditionally vote Labour are going to switch to Reform in this by-election.
Yeah, it would be an incredible boost, wouldn't it, to Reform? It's been a turbulent couple of weeks with everything that's happened with Rupert Lowe, etc. But it would be a great statement for Reform to be able to say, look, you know, we're back and we're getting bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be a real step up for Reform winning this. And they've been campaigning there for quite some time since Mark Amesbury, the outgoing MP who punched a constituent. Since that happened, from the very day that happened, Reform have been on the ground, knocking on doors, building up some information.
We'll watch with interest, and of course any other developments on that we'll bring you here on Talk. Let's move to this story. We did touch on it a second ago. Simon, the Treasury admitting migrants will remain in temporary accommodation for years as it seeks to cut costs in the small boat crisis. Now, of course, Labour have a very different way of approaching this to most sensible and sane people. Let's have a little reminder for those who aren't too sure what Keir Starmer's big plan is.
You will have helped to smash the gangs, secure our borders, and save countless lives. Smash the criminal gangs, and they are criminal gangs, that are running this vile trade and putting people in the boats. Take those gangs down. I think smashing the gangs that are taking people's money is a deterrent. I think you have to smash those gangs. The only way to stop that is to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade. Smash the gangs.
There it is. How's the smash the gangs thing going? I'm not sure he's chalking up much success on this one, Simon.
Not at all. And just to continue to quote Keir Starmer, he said before the general election, we will end the use of asylum hotels, saving British taxpayers billions of pounds. Well, the use of hotels has gone up by 8,000 people since he took power. I find it really annoying, actually. I can't think in my 35 years in politics of a political party that said one thing in the run-up to a general election and done something else once in power, whether it's the promise not to increase council tax, it's now going up by 5%, to reduce energy bills by £300, they're going up, not coming down. We'll smash the gangs, the number of people coming into the country illegally is going up. We'll end the use of hotels. The use of hotels is going up for illegal immigrants. I mean, it's just one thing after another. And this is costing, as we pointed out, £55 million a day. British taxpayers, That's how much they're paying for this. I mean, it's just outrageous, and it's not a solution.
No, it's not a solution and never will be. Quick word on this one. Bridget Phillipson calling for Public Sector Fraud Authority to investigate reports of loan fraud as students enrolling to access loans without any intention to attend or repay. This was a very good and thorough Sunday Times investigation revealing concerns about small franchise colleges enrolling students, some Romanian nationals who may be recruited to exploit the system. Allegations include the use of fake documents and students unable to even speak the language.
Yeah, Sunday Times have done a great job. It's ridiculous, though, that we have to rely on a newspaper to do the investigation instead of government itself spotting that it's being ripped off. This is students, many Romanian, who are applying to do university courses, not so that they can study, but so that they can apply for a student loan that they never pay back. And the student loan bill now is at about, I think it's about £250 billion. That's how much is owned. I mean, it's just unsustainable. We've been giving money away. That's what this suggests. Yeah,
100%. And a final one to finish on. The average cost of a pint is set to exceed £5 next month, with pub chiefs blaming Labour's tax policies. Didn't Rachel Reeves previously claim people would save a penny on a pint following that last budget? Let's have a reminder.
I can confirm that alcohol duty rates on non-draft products will increase in line with RPI from February next year. But nearly 2/3 of alcoholic drinks sold in pubs are served on draft. So today, instead of uprating these products in line with inflation, I am cutting draft duty by 1.7%. Which means a penny off the pints in the pub.
So it's some bizarre crowing and cheering on that for some strange reason. That was the bit that back in the day, Simon, everyone waited, didn't they, for the sort of tobacco and booze tax announcement, whichever way it went. But of course, it's going to, like so many decisions, it will just completely get lost and insignificant if the cost is going up anyway. So £5 a pint, which seems frankly extraordinary to me.
Terrible. 21p it's going up by, and this is because of national insurance increases, the fact that business rates have just gone up for pubs and landlords, the minimum wage has just gone up, so she's taking a penny off, which is increasing everything else. And it breaks my heart to have to pay over £5 for a pint of beer. I mean, what is the world coming to? You really have to search out the cheaper pubs. I mean, Wetherspoons are always good value, Sam Smith's, and I'm sure there are other brands as well, but it's outrageous that we're now paying over £5, and much more in London, I have to say.
Yeah. Can you remember what you first paid for a pint, Simon? You know, back in the day when you had that moody ID.
Yeah, no, well, absolutely. I probably started drinking under 18, if I'm completely honest. But it was certainly well less than £1, that's for sure. I mean, it must have been 50, 60p a pint, I would have thought.
Mad, isn't it?
Yeah, this was in Burnley many years ago.
Yeah, you can't get a bag of Nobby's nuts for that these days. That's how bad things are. Listen, Simon, always a pleasure. Simon Danchuk, the former Labour MP, now a Reform UK member with us on the programme. 0344 499 1000. Comments on anything you've just heard. I want to go back to that key question of where you would slash spending. And we just mentioned the tale of the migrant hotels. And I'm going to say this for the umpteenth time. I don't think, if you're left-wing or right-wing, wouldn't everybody agree that that is unacceptable? That we have hotels rammed with tens and tens of thousands of people, mostly young men, waiting to be processed. Really? I mean, that is, you could address that if you really wanted to. Rupert Lowe said he would address it. There was disagreement with his own party on that. Maybe there's things we don't know in terms of how this has to work. I'm not suggesting it's the work of a moment, but I can't also believe it's beyond the wit of mankind, can you? Where would you slash spending if you wanted to balance the books here in the UK? 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk, 0344 499 1000. We've got a lot to get through. We'll come to some of your comments in a few moments' time. We are, of course, responding to the incredible situation where we have the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is, clearly hell-bent on attempting to balance the books. I say that almost with a smile on my face. There's many ways you can try and balance books within the government, and, of course, people supposedly have tried a little bit over the years. I wouldn't say with enormous success. Is there a kind of inner philosophy that is just missing, often that professional politicians can never quite get their head around? We've got this sort of template of a system that nobody has really significantly challenged over the years. What is happening in America with Trump, it might be unconventional, not everybody's cup of tea, but, certainly they're going full pelt to try and sort this out. Rachel Reeves planning, apparently to save money, could be 50,000 civil service jobs cuts. And you are forced to say, well, if they can afford to get rid of 50,000 people, then what were those 50,000 people doing in the first place? These are the questions one tends to ask. Let's get a word on this from Lord Francis Maude, Conservative peer, former Secretary of State, of course, in the Conservative governments. Francis, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
It is the never-ending kind of... I can only imagine that sort of permanent secretaries and whoever a Secretary of State might be at a certain time in each department, they listen to people like me sort of mouthing off about saving money, and they probably sit there saying, well, if we could, we would. Is it a lack of... Firstly, before we come on to some detail, is there sort of a lack of intention? Is it a naivety? Is it too difficult, too challenging? What goes on here? Because we're talking about departments here that spend billions of other people's money.
It is difficult, but it can be done. And in the coalition government, 2010 to 2015, we did it.
I remember.
We had a program, a very focused program of efficiency savings, where we cut the running costs of government cumulative. You add each year's savings to the last, over 5 years, of £52 billion off the running cost of government. And we downsized the civil service by more than 100,000. That was a 21% reduction. And it's very, just to give you an illustration of how hard it is and how it's one thing for the Chancellor to say that it's going to happen. But in October 2023, so 18 months ago, the then Chancellor announced that there was to be a cap on civil service numbers. And what happened? The following quarter, it expanded by 1.3%. The following quarter, first quarter of last year, expanded by 1.6%. Every quarter since then, since the Chancellor, the most senior financial minister in the government, announced a cap, that there should be no increase in the numbers. In each quarter, the numbers have increased. And part of the problem is nobody really knows at the centre of government what's going on. Yeah. I was shocked to find in 2010 when I came back into government, that the centre of the government didn't know how many civil servants there were, because I was asking questions when I was in opposition. And instead of getting a parliamentary answer, my question got referred to the Office of National Statistics, as if it was a kind of mildly interesting,
sort of almost like a trivia
number.
Question, almost.
Well, exactly, but no one was actually regarding this as absolutely basic 101 management information. So as soon as I came in, we sent a directive around every part of central government. We need to know what the headcount is, what is the full-time equivalent, and then I said I'm going to publish it. And huge resistance to publishing it on the basis, I was told, the national statistician, no less at the time, said, well, you can't publish it because it's a new statistical series and it hasn't been quality assured. And I said, no, it isn't a statistical series, and I know it's not good quality data, but publish it and you'll find it gets better. It's management information. which we're going to publish because we're committed to transparency. And that was part of the process of getting this taken seriously. But, between 2010 and 2015, the numbers fell by, as I say, over 20%. It plateaued for a year, and then it went up again. And it's now considerably higher than it was in 2010 when the coalition government came in. And no ministers took a decision that should happen. It just happened. It growed like Topsy.
And it seems to be, I don't know what happens to some politicians, Francis, that almost seems to be devoid and divorced from this other part of life where taxpayers' money is being sent through the mill in various departments, and just let it go. We won't get involved in that. And I don't think we need Elon Musk here, but we do need.
No, you don't.
We do need somebody to call out at the problem, right?
Well, as I say, we did it in the coalition government, and what we did was we simply said George Osborne in the Treasury imposed some cuts in government in budget, not saying it's all got to come off administration, but just here is your budget. It's lower than it was, and then we from the Cabinet Office said we will help you in the departments cut the costs, the running costs, which means that for the public. And the citizens who are using services, they see no disadvantage because you're taking out the hidden costs of government, and at the same time we ran a huge digital transformation program. We created gov.uk, GDS. It was world leading, and we were ranked best in the world in 2016 for e-government. We've slipped back down the rankings since then. But it can be done. We did show that you can get more for less. You can get better services for less money, but it requires real focus. Yeah. It requires attention to detail, and it requires being willing to be a bit of a bloody nuisance around the place.
Indeed, and of course, as you well know, this world works on certain sort of stereotypes. So when the Conservatives decide to save some money, it's because they are evil Tories who don't like poor people. When Labour do it, they're fiscally prudent, to borrow one of those horrible Gordon Brown terms, and they're doing it for the common good. So you sort of have to wrestle. I suppose you have to ignore that to a certain extent in politics, but I do find it rather interesting that the £22 billion black hole that Rachel Reeves keeps talking about,
complete rubbish,
which is indeed. I mean, the more you look into it, not literally, because it doesn't exist, but the more you try to look into it, I mean, you just face this kind of, hang on a second, where has this come from? However, there is certainly a big black hole now since Rachel Reeves took over, and I think it exceeds the 22 billion.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes it pale into insignificance. Yeah. Of course, it was a completely bogus number to begin with. And the problem is that the government has both increased spending in a very kind of incontinent way, but at the same time has done things which actually slash growth and have made growth much more anemic than was the case. And so, of course, there's going to be much less revenue coming in from a vibrant economy that you would hope for. And so, it's a double whammy.
Yeah, 100%. Francis, listen, lovely to speak with you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Lord Francis Maude, Conservative peer, former minister in the previous Conservative government. So they gave it a go with a degree of success. Some would say, well, not enough. They could have gone further. How or where would you slash spending if you want to save a few quid? Let's speak with Shimian Lee, policy analyst at the Taxpayers Alliance. Look, this one, Shimian, plagues every chancellor and every prime minister. How do we save money? They all say we want to save money. They all say we want growth. But of course, achieving it convincingly is a whole different ball game. I'm not saying it doesn't require some thought, but it also requires some confidence and be brave about what you believe in, and it will pay dividends. But we don't seem to have politicians that want to do that.
Well, I think we have politicians that are unwilling to face reality. I mean, spending was always unsustainable under this government, and now the Chancellor is being forced to face reality with these spending cuts. I mean, if you just look at spending in the upcoming financial year, the country is set to spend £1.27 trillion in the next financial year. That's £20 billion more than it spent at the peak of the pandemic in 2020-21. And that number is only set to grow. In fact, public spending is at an unprecedented level. We recently had a briefing note out at the Taxpayers Alliance, a look at the history of public spending. And if we look going forward, from now to the end of this parliament, public spending is set to be about 45% of GDP on average. Now, just to give you an idea of how unprecedented that level of spending is, 45% of GDP has only ever been exceeded on 3 occasions since the Second World War. One was during COVID, one was during the financial crisis, and one was during the sterling crisis back in 1976. So the level of public spending that this government is taking us to is frankly totally unprecedented, and now they're being forced to face the fiscal reality of that.
Yeah. I just mentioned to Francis Maud that, you know, if you can lose 50,000 civil servants, which may be the top end of predicted figures on this, you do have to wonder what those 50,000 were doing in the first place. Smart money says that it's not just about individuals, because I know it's not personal about an individual's job, but this is public money that is being spent in the multiple millions and billions. And lots of other areas of projects, some vanity, other areas of government waste. I mean, it seems that we've sort of arrived in this place where we're in a never-ending loop of debt. No good news is ever announced from governments. We haven't seen it from this one. We didn't see it from the tail end of the last one either. And you scratch your head and think, well, what am I working for? What am I doing here?
Well, you're absolutely right on the fact that the civil service has grown enormously since the last government. I mean, if you look at the pay bill of the civil service, the amount we pay the civil service, that's actually gone up by 70% since 2016. That's much, much faster than the rest of the economy. I mean, the economy certainly hasn't grown by 70%. And if you look at the public sector more widely, which is about 10 times the size of the civil service, so the civil service is about 540,000 people, the public sector about 5.8 million people. That grew by 100,000 positions just last year. That means 300 new public sector positions every single day. So the cost is just astronomical. And let's not forget that each and every one of these public sector workers is going to have a massive defined benefit pension with employer contribution up to 27%, far beyond what any of us can ever get in the private sector. And we in the private sector who are paying our taxes are the ones that are funding this massive expansion.
Yeah. And I said at the very beginning of the programme, Simeon, that these, when I hear announcements, the likes of which Rachel Reeves is alluding to and will perhaps make on Wednesday, these shouldn't be emergency measures. This should be how the government operates. This should be what always happens, finding substantial ways of saving money. It shouldn't be said, you know, regrettably, we've got to lose jobs that clearly we can afford to lose in terms of what certain roles or positions do. It's a complete philosophical change that's needed in how governments function.
I think you're 100% right there. I mean, we recently had an investigation into government procurement cards, for example, and what we found really showed the attitude of civil servants. I mean, we found thousands of pounds being spent on private members clubs, you know, restaurants, 5-star hotels. That's what public money, taxpayer money is being spent on. Yeah. In fact, we actually had one finding where they spent £2,500 on luxury glassware, wine glasses for £2,500. That's the sort of attitude that they have in the civil service.
Yeah. Curious times. I'd like to have seen those wine glasses. Simeon, great to have you on again. Nice to speak. Simeon Lee, policy analyst at the Taxpayers Alliance. Over to you on this one. Where would you slash spending? Serious question. In addition to that, all the other issues that are up and running as well, the migrant hotel costs, also Heathrow. What was the boss of Heathrow doing in bed as the place was literally falling apart? How did they manage to not notice they had 2 other substations that they could have used to keep the lights on? It wouldn't necessarily have meant that all the flights took off, because there was a fire nearby after all. I understand that. But the fact that it all closed down, my instinct on that is that this was all about the addiction to the word lockdown. Oh, that's what you do. There's an emergency. What do? We lock it all down. Yeah, lock it all down. That's the best thing to do. Then we can all go to bed at night and sleep. I mean, that's usually used as a metaphor. The boss literally did that. 0344 499 1000.
when you say you can't go on for much longer, I mean, is she going to last, do you think? I mean, I don't...
Look, I've got views on this because obviously having lived the experience.
Yeah.
Never a good idea for a Prime Minister to get rid of the Chancellor. I know I'm biased, but I think all he's going to do is shorten his political shelf life, Keir Starmer. If he gets rid of her, no one's going to say, oh, well done, you've got rid of Rachel Reeves. They'll say, well, you know, if you've got rid of her, what are you doing still there?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Terry in Islington says, do you think Rachel will axe DEI jobs in the civil service? That's an obvious place to start. All the research suggesting these initiatives are divisive, cause conflict within the workplace. Yeah, and they kind of all arrived at a time when, you know, the whole equality thing was sorting itself out with incredible success. Not perfect, but you get the point. No, I don't think they will, Terry. I honestly think that that's not in their DNA to consider that. Because they think if they do, then it makes them horrible people. Well, it doesn't. It makes them quite sensible people. Chris says, I'm 76 years old this year. My first pint of beer when I was 18 cost £0.50. Now a pint is £5. I could have bought 40 pints with that back in the day. Man. Thank you, Chris. That's a great comparison. 40 pints with what? Yeah. Let's talk to Ray in Colchester on spending. How you doing, Ray?
I'm doing very well, Ian. It's just another day in the place that used to be called Great Britain, as we hear about its absolute catastrophe that is our financial situation, which we seem to be at one point, and we're now paying interest, the highest interest we've ever paid as a country for the amount of money we're borrowing, while at the same time giving away billions of pounds to really all and sundry, apart from the people inside the country that are paying for all of this and lumbering ourselves with massive debt. And you pose the question, what would you cut? Well, I'm afraid the foreign aid budget would have to be, it's already gone down, it will have to basically go down much, much lower. And actually, very much like Doge are doing over in America, actually looking at where we're giving this money to and whether it actually represents value or is really just a giant money laundering operation, which I'm afraid to say seems more and more likely.
And it probably is, even if it's sort of inadvertently done. But I just think too many politicians actually quite like, I know it's not just the civil service, there's loads of other areas and initiatives you could look at, but I think they quite like it that way. It kind of suits them to have this super state that is big and brimmed and full of characters that, are supposedly doing impressive jobs.
Well, I think you're right, but also you've got the most ridiculous thing. So during the financial bailout, where we bailed out the basically bankrupt banks, all of them, to the tunes of billions of pounds, well, those billions of pounds that we printed and lent them and are paying interest on, we are now paying them interest on that money, which they are banking with the Bank of England to the tune of 35 to 45 billion pound a year, of which no other central bank in the world has done so. They also lent money to their bankrupt banks, and they don't pay any interest on that money, whereas we are paying that interest to them. So just there alone, we've got 35 billion. We've also got another probably 6-7 billion taken off of the of what we're sending abroad. You've then also got something that, although not a cut, is something that the government could do very easily, which would ease a lot of pressures on people. And that is the completely artificial link between the cost of power generated by wind and solar, which is not affected by the rising costs of gas and oil across on the market. It is an artificial link, basically, that they put in. That link can be broken tomorrow, and basically we would then be paying the lower real costs of solar and basically wind power. However, they have that cost, which means that every single person, we are paying massively over the generation costs on those things. And in fact, we're paying twice because we have to pay for when there's too much wind and we have to switch those things off. So just there alone, we are talking billions and billions of pounds. The problem is not we don't have any money. The problem is much deeper than that. The problem is what's happening to the money. It is clearly now they're unable now to really cover up the absolute corruption that is now rampant across, I would say, nearly every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. It's a grim analysis, but I tell you what, Ray, I think you're probably bang on with most of that. Listen, thank you. I've got to move, Ray, just to get more comments on. Thank you for that. This will be Michael in Birmingham on slashing spending. Michael, what have you got for us?
Well, last caller was absolutely brilliant. He really nailed it. First pint, by the way, 21p, pint of dark mild. I'm in Birmingham. Come on. So
21p. That's madness,
that
right?
ages me. That ages me.
Yeah.
No, but I speak as an experienced civil servant, former civil servant, and local authority health service, and worked as a contractor for in and out of the civil service for the last 10, 15 years. Man, I mean, the DEI stuff, that goes without saying. That is a real no-brainer. It's self-serving, it's completely pervasive, and it doesn't achieve nothing. But what I've seen time and time again, and in fact been part of it as a contractor, is money-saving units set up to save money, which are more expensive than the money that they save.
Oh, every time. So, yeah, these are the quangos that are set up to bust the quangos.
No, they're kind of like internal programs where they get a group of civil servants to be the unit, and they're actually, the cost of that unit is more than the money they're going to save. Yeah. But also the work culture, Ian, which people may or may not be aware of, and I'm nailing civil servants here, and I don't care. They're absent without leave half the time. Well, absent with leave. They get bundles of leave. There's compressed working hours. As contractors, we prop them up because contractors don't go off sick. You can be hired and fired. You don't get sick pay. You don't get holiday pay. You don't get pensions. But they always look to get rid of contractors. But we're the ones that do the work for them because they're on courses. They're on long-term maternity, paternity for months, decades on end. They work compressed hours. They've got compressed working days. They say no meetings except between 10 and 12 and 2 and 4. Monday to Wednesday. It's all there, Ian. It really is easy.
What is it when you, Michael? The term compressed day, is that just like putting more things into one day? What's the deal with that term?
It's supposed to be they work say 35 hours across 4 days and take Friday off.
Right, gotcha.
But you can rest assured, try and get them in those extended hours, and there ain't anybody there.
Yeah.
And equally, try and get them when they're working from home. You need a Ouija board, not a telephone, mate. So you know.
I love it, Michael. It's a great call. Is there anybody there? We're going to try and contact the land of the civil servant living if we can. Look, we need good servants, civil servants. 100%. Nobody is saying get rid of all civil servants. We just want the good ones kept. We want people who understand efficiency. We don't want people who've kind of fallen. There's so many who fall into a kind of a job and it's just very convenient. It's one that you can really never get fired from unless you've done something to set fire to the building or committed second-degree murder. But beyond that, you're pretty safe, sort of job for life territory. I saw it a little bit in the BBC, which in theory is, you don't really refer to BBC personnel as civil servants, but they kind of are in a curious way, as in taking the taxpayer coin. And you begin to you look at the situation of how things function when people have never got a threat of losing their job, heavily protected in that respect. And so it's a job for life. There's more processes and hurdles to get things done that you could ever imagine. Is it the best person for the job? Oh no, you can't just give the best person the job. You've got to go through a system, because poor old Alf has been there for years. He should have the job. Yeah, but he's not very good. Well, it doesn't matter. He's been here for a long time. He's got the title and everything. How did he get the title in the first place? There's all of that stuff. And all the other areas of life where we could, in theory, save money. One here, get rid of public sector pensions. You wouldn't need any other cuts. It's a very good point. And Peter says, what I would do for a start is to only give foreign aid to disaster relief only. It's a good one too. And Claire says, the backup of Heathrow Airport, like so much of this country, the lights are on, but there's no one there. Great point. Our lines are open. Back with more from you coming up on the other side of the news.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. We are, of course, talking about slashing civil servant numbers. In fact, it's not just about that. Keir Starmer is backing plans to do this. Rachel Reeves targeting $2 billion in savings by 2030. Does that even touch the sides when you allow for other issues that happen in tandem? Starmer says it's about cutting costs and improving services. Unions, understandably, are not very happy about this. An almighty clash is on the way. Also this afternoon, Heathrow Airport faces a backlash after 200,000 passengers were stranded during Friday's chaos. Turns out the National Grid said the airport did have other ways of getting the lights back on. This, of course, was no consolation to anybody, particularly the boss of Heathrow, who, while all this was happening, was actually in bed. Yes, he went back to bed during the crisis. And facial recognition cameras are coming to UK high streets, starting in Croydon this summer. The Met Police say it is a win for public safety, but critics warn of privacy concerns. This one from Andy in Cornwall. I would reduce costs by the following. Remove London waiting pro rata for anyone working from home. It's a good point. If you're working from home, you don't need the London waiting allowance. Stop subsidised food and drink in Westminster. And finally, make all civil servants work until they're 67 to get their pensions. I think I'm right in saying, because I used to work in Westminster for a bit, in the press gallery. I think the food isn't subsidised, it is just non-profit making. So there's no taxpayer money goes into the food as such, but the infrastructure to run a massive restaurant, several, is clearly where the cash goes. But I certainly take the point. Andy, thank you for that. Lots to get through. Let's get a word from Alan Tolhurst, chief reporter at Politics Home, on this and the other big stories of the day. Alan, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon. As someone who regularly takes their lunch in the Palace of Westminster, I'm glad you set the record straight there.
Yes, I think I'm right in saying that, aren't I? It's not that it's subsidised, it's just not profit.
Yeah, exactly. So the prices look pretty reasonable, but that's just because, there's no kind of attempt to make profit. It's just simply to kind of keep things going. So
yeah. I mean, some might say, well, could you close one restaurant and, maybe, there's still a few left, even if you shut one of them?
I don't know what that would do in terms of the price. It would just make the ones that were there busier, I suppose.
Yes, I guess so. I mean, it is a workplace. People have got to eat, so...
Yeah, and obviously, and also there are thousands of people who work in the Palace of Westminster, not just kind of MPs. There are 650 MPs, and there are sort of like 15,000 people who work there. So yeah, it's not just the idea of kind of politicians at the trough or media at the trough is probably slightly wider than mark.
Yeah,
but I would say that, I'm afraid.
No, but I've always been slightly defensive on that very point, because it comes up a lot. I saw somebody who should know better on social media the other day making that, wheeling out the same old kind of, taxpayer funded, subsidised steak and chips only cost you 3p or something. It was all largely nonsense. And I thought, well, I couldn't be bothered to reply, because that's often the best way to do it. But nonetheless, I mean, you mentioned the thousands that work there.
Yeah.
There may not be thousands working there soon if Rachel Reeves' dream of cutting jobs, which, depending on who you listen to, could be 10,000, could be 50,000, by 2030, we will have a much slimmer civil service.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it was interesting that Pat McFadden, who's the cabinet minister who's in charge of a lot of pushing through a lot of these kind of reforms, he said last weekend that it wasn't about kind of looking at the headcount necessarily. It's about making it kind of more efficient and save money. But clearly, if you look at the numbers, they peaked in sort of about 2009, and then all through the kind of coalition years under the Tories, the numbers of civil servants went down massively, and then it started to tick up again with the referendum, after the referendum, because they needed lots of thousands of civil servants to push through kind of change as we left the European Union. Then that number increased again during the pandemic, when thousands more were hired to kind of help out to deal with things like the vaccine rollout, all this kind of other stuff. And those numbers have been pretty sticky. They haven't come down at all. So I think, obviously, we're beyond kind of those Brexit transition. We're beyond the pandemic. I think naturally you would see a lot of those people then move out. The problem is it's really hard actually to get rid of people from the civil service. And people within Whitehall, say this themselves. I had a couple of former civil servants on our podcast last week who said that there really is very little mechanisms for kind of pushing out people who aren't really performing, and that's what they want to see, really. If you are going to bring the numbers down, actually, if you are going to tackle efficiency, it's about being able to manage people out. There's been a lot of grade inflation recently, where people have kind of been on higher grades because pay scales have been lower. So the only way to hire someone from the private sector is to hire them on a higher grade level, so they're not kind of taking a big pay cut. But then they're kind of stuck on these higher grades when they're not really needed in those kind of higher levels, really.
Yeah, and we've all worked with people where, we've kind of, after being there a while, you sort of whisper to the person on the desk next to you, what does that guy over there do? And the answer comes back, well, we don't really know, but they've been here for 5 years and, seem to be quite important and had certainly paid rather well. I said earlier, Alan, that the civil service, we need good civil servants to make things run. And even if you speak to the most sort of ardent right-wing Tory, they will, Nadine Dorries actually is a good example. She had no problem with her civil servants. She thought the ones around her were absolutely amazing, couldn't have done her job without them. They were just, top of the tree. But I think for most people, it's the amount of civil servants are there, and it becomes increasingly, I suppose, confusing in the 21st century. We live in a digital world. Some people work from home, etc., to justify the sheer amount of people that have to keep the country moving.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, if you're going to sort of do less or be more efficient, then you are going to need fewer people. And as I said, there's good reason why naturally those numbers would be looking to come down. Obviously, the government wants to kind of accelerate that process, maybe look at kind of like buyouts and redundancies, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You do hear those stories from sort of France and Spain occasionally, where someone's accidentally been on the payroll of some civil service thing for like 20 years, and no one sort of noticed. They never came into work for sort of 20 years. We don't necessarily have things quite that bad, but yeah, I agree. Like, there does need to be this change, and I guess it's to do with kind of, if we're looking at saving money, even cutting 50,000 or even 100,000 would not take a huge amount of money in comparison with wider public spending. But I guess it would be a big signal that that's the kind of movement the government wants to take, and I think that's kind of the fine line I think the government is trying to tread at the moment. We are both doing things which are going to make a real difference in terms of efficiency and saving money, but also kind of sending that signal as to what they want to achieve as a government, how they want to kind of operate in terms of what they want to deliver. Because when you talk about civil servants, you've got to parse out, are these people who work in the finance department, are these people who work in communications, or are these, for example, prison officers who are civil servants? I think you don't necessarily want to be cutting the numbers of prison officers that you have, but there are other places that you can look to perhaps take down. Perhaps, people in the press office might be one of the first ones to perhaps get the chop, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I was looking at one of the part of Rachel Reeves' plan actually was about recruitment as well. Certainly in HMRC, plans to recruit 600 extra staff to tackle tax avoidance, introduce harsher penalties for late payments, that kind of thing. And I thought, well, the only people I can see getting collared is sort of Bob the painter and decorator, who normally claims for 10 brushes a month in his tax return expenses, is going to be told he can only claim for 5 or something, rather than that multi-squillion pound corporation based offshore somewhere that pays literally nothing.
Yeah, and I suppose it's how useful each of those are. I mean, a lot of people I've got friends who work in the NHS who talk about the amount of kind of non-clinical staff there are. Obviously, we've seen scrapping of NHS England. There's a move to kind of get rid of perhaps some of those kind of non-clinical. So the money that is being spent, because there is going to continue to be more money spent in the NHS, is going to where people want to do. As it doesn't matter, people don't really care how many people work there. All they want is kind of those waiting figures, the wait to come down, to be able to get an appointment, to be able to get their medication, to be able to get operations. And so I think it's about kind of where you kind of put that money, where you kind of put those extra staff, because extra staff in the HMRC, if theoretically they can claw back more tax money, it would be money well spent. As you say, people would kind of doubt whether the government is able to do so, and I suppose it's about sending that signal as to where you want to spend the money.
Indeed. Well, where you want to spend the money when you're getting freebies as well, because Rachel Reeves is also under there should be a name for this, I don't know, Wembley Gate or something, because it happened with Taylor Swift, and now Sabrina Carpenter appears to be the artist of the moment, where our head honchos in the world of politics, Rachel Reeves in particular, taking a couple of freebies to go and see a gig. Look, I mean, it's not our money that's being used in that respect, although I suppose you could say transportation of taking the Chancellor around. She has a security detail around her, could be a consideration. But it's the optics, isn't it? It's when you're asking people to cut back and you're sitting there, in the prawn sandwich and vol au vent seats at Wembley watching a gig with 2 VIP £600 tickets, it just doesn't look very good.
No, it's pretty tin-eared politically, I think, and obviously it would be more generally. But I think two things make it kind of worse. One is that last year we obviously had this massive stories, constant stories about free, sort of freebie gate, about the Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and others were taking money from Wahid Ali for clothing. There was obviously lots of stuff around, as you say, Taylor Swift tickets. How many politicians took that? I think, even if you think it was justified to go to Sabrina Carpenter, you might just think politically maybe it might be best just to kind of, not take those, even if it means not going, just for a little while, that kind of sacrifice, but so that you don't end up with stories like this. A massive week for the Chancellor, and she would rather people weren't talking about this, but she's given an opportunity for people to talk about this kind of stuff. And secondly, she's just announced massive welfare cuts. Even if you think that they're kind of justified, the optics of it, having taken £5 billion off the welfare budget of people, claiming for disability benefits, when you're taking kind of free tickets, like, I say VIP box to go and see to go and see Sabrina Carpenter, it just, for a government that's really kind of conscious of kind of how things look, it's just the optics of it just look really bad in this of all weeks.
Yeah, and they'd already been through the Taylor Swift thing. That's the crazy thing about it. It's
You've got to learn from your mistakes.
Did they? Nobody at the, no civil servant, speaking of which, pop up and go, do you not remember Taylor Swift, guys? What happened there? Because it seems the entire cabinet went about 18 times each to see Taylor Swift.
Right, exactly. That's, once you've been through this kind of stuff before, and there have obviously been lots of kind of rows over freebies and people taking things and people getting money in corporate sponsorship and boxes to watch the football, and there's no indication here of kind of that lobbying took place or anything like that. Obviously, the tickets were kind of, these hospitality ones were gifted because of, apparently, for security reasons, and which I totally understand as the Chancellor. It's more difficult to engage in these kind of stuff as in the cheap seats as she might want to be. But the fact is, it just, the row that's created, and the kind of months and months and all the oxygen this took up last year. So why kind of dredge it all back up again? It's allowed everything to be kind of the pot to be stirred around this stuff again, when she'd much rather be focusing on the massive job that she's got to do on Wednesday with the spring statement.
Yeah, and there was another story that sort of fed into this as well, when Angela Rayner went on an official trip to Ethiopia, and this is all about signing a trade deal that had been sort of in the pipeline for a while, but she was there as Deputy Prime Minister. Off she goes, signs the trade deal, and they're sitting around, and they say any other business, and one expert who was on the trip says, I think this is a great way to show our intent at this part of Africa. Another person put their hand up and said, I reckon this could be the start of lots more deals like this in cooperation with Ethiopia, which has had its struggles. And Angela Rayner put her hand up and said, can I go on a safari, please? It does seem, again, I know you don't always get to go to Ethiopia. She was told she couldn't go on a safari because it wouldn't be a very good look. But again, the optics.
Yeah, and also the fact that this story got out as well. The fact that this report is reported in the Times by Max Kendricks and Kate McCann in the Times this morning. The fact that it got out clearly shows that there's some problems there as well. This is the sort of thing that because it might just be a fairly offhanded remark that she made. Oh, given that I'm here, given that we're doing kind of stuff outside of this,
got an afternoon off. Yeah, that
right, exactly. But the fact that someone's willing to kind of to brief that to a national newspaper to make her kind of look foolish, to kind of drag her into this kind of story, I think is a bad sign as well. So not a great start to the week in what is a very, very important week for this government.
Where's Lord Ali when you need him, eh? Maybe that's what she was thinking. And just a final one, which I think is certainly worth mentioning, and that's the cost of a pint, Alan.
Certainly is, yeah.
Now, I know that you work around Westminster, where all diligent journos never go near a bar, and even when you do, it's flipping subsidised. But £5 for a pint is a crime scene, frankly.
Well, £5 would be cheap for Westminster if anyone's been around in the pubs around Westminster at the moment. True. I will say, I'll stand up for. I lived out in Kent, and my local it's £4.75. There's another pub near me that you can get a pint for £4 still. So if you're struggling with your £5 pints, just come see me in Kent. There'll always be a cheap pint around here, I reckon.
Roughly what area of Kent are you in?
Near Westmoreland, near between Sevenoaks and Maidstone.
Right, yeah. So you're in my neck of the woods as well, because I know a few where I think it's over a £5. I'm sure it is for some.
Yeah. Well, it depends what you want. If you're on your sort of European lagers, I'm sure it will be more than £5. But if you're having a good local Kent beer, then you can still get one for under a £5. So I'll push for that. The serious point is this story is to do with the fact that the massive rises in the minimum wage, which obviously most people think is a good thing, but it is kind of a pressure on employers. Obviously, the increase in on national insurance. The employer's contribution starts next week. That's going to put pressure on, and obviously some changes to kind of business rates and tax breaks. The pub associations say that this is really, really negative towards them, and they are going to have to put prices up, and that kind of magic £5 kind of barrier, I think, is going to be breached for quite a lot of places in the next few months.
Yeah, I sense you're right. Alan, thank you as ever for your time. He's Alan Tolhurst, chief reporter at Politics Home. Pick into that wherever you'd like. Comments on the bigger question, where would you slash spending? I mean, this guy's out of control, right? I mean, it's absolutely out of control. And to compound it, of course, we're seeing a slashing of services. We're watching council tax go up. I was also looking as well, something I feel really strongly about. It doesn't affect me personally, but people who've got a second home, which they may have bought because they want a holiday home, they might have got it because they want to rent it out, sort of Airbnb, or rent it out as a permanent place. Well, whatever, it's up to you, right? We're not North Korea. If you want to buy a second house, buy a second house. If you want to rent it out, make a few quid, fantastic. You're looking after yourself. You're not, at some point that house will be your pension, which would be the reason most people would invest in that kind of way. We've got more and more local authorities going for a double count. If it's your second home, they'll double your council tax. I'm sure I read somewhere where some places are tripling the cost of council tax for having the audacity to buy a second home. Why would you be, in what kind of messed up world would you be punished for buying a second home? I mean, you should be congratulated. In fact, your council tax should be slightly less, because I think you could say, well, you know what, on balance, you might not be using some of the local facilities in the same way as a local. But to me, it's the symbolism of here's someone who's done their own thing, somehow found a way to get a second property. They're going to make a few quid. If they make a few quid, they're less reliant on the state. They're doing the kind of instinct thing of attempting to start what might just be a small business. It might be a bit of a sideline, but there's another place we can tax people. Yes, second home. On what basis? I'm pretty sure if you could assemble a team of really impressive top tax lawyers, you'd be able to prove to a local authority that was unacceptable or illegal. You've got to pay more because it's your second home. Do you know what you think about that? How weird that is. It's literally like simply taxing chairs. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's a bit like stamp. I mean, don't get me started on stamp duty. The horror of stamp duty, one of the most indefensible taxes on the planet. But that's the sort of world we're currently living in. So the point here is that we're spending more, we're getting less. They're talking about saving money. Where really are we going to save money? I mean, come on. Having a couple of billion, which is a lot when you isolate that figure, you put it into the grander scale of government spending and other areas that while you're saving in that area, things are going up in somewhere else, then you've got a problem, i.e. you've saved nothing. 0344 499 1000. Back with you in a couple of moments. First, though, time to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning something rather special. Those elusive Oasis tickets could be yours at Wembley this summer. Have a listen.
How'd you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
people are not paying more income tax or national insurance in their pay slips. They're not paying more on VAT in the shops, especially as we still struggle with the cost of living crisis. But we've increased the national living wage for the lowest earning. We're increasing the triple lock amount of money that's coming through to pensioners, and inflation is coming down and is more stable. So all of these things are measures to try to tackle the cost of living crisis, to bring stability back to the economy. In fact, it's the first time in many months that wages have been going up quicker than the cost of the goods and services that we pay for.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Neil says, some might say that Rachel Thieves is just tone deaf when it comes to taking freebies, but I think it's more than that. She knows what she's doing. She knows she'll be found out, but in all honesty, she doesn't give a... because that's socialism for you. Yeah, there is something about a sort of left-wing thought process that even with something like taking gig tickets or, a donation to buy yourself a couple of grand's worth of suit, a holiday, whatever it happens to be, that because you are safe in the knowledge that you are a socialist, I don't really mean, I know this is not a cheap point, I think this is absolutely how it functions, which is why when Starmer was having all that gear bought for him, tier 2 gear, free gear Kia, during that period, it didn't really land with the left because there was nothing wrong with it, because it was their man doing it. And when Rachel Reeves takes a trip to see Sabrina Carpenter, that's fine, because it couldn't be that she's ostentatious or clumsy or greedy, because she's left-wing. So she can't be any of those things. You can't accuse her of that, because it's impossible that she could just be greedy or completely naive to how things look. If somebody on the right, if David Cameron was seen tapping his foot to the impressive tempos of Coldplay over there at Wembley, that'd be, oh, look at the old toff, look, enjoying a freebie, loves a bit of VIP, doesn't he? Typical Tory. It kind of lands in completely different ways. I have long thought that is the problem with the kind of left and the right. Ultimately, when it comes to the bigger decisions, as we now know, Rachel Reeves is having to make decisions that, had the Tories done it, there'd be a mass riot on the streets. But it's Rachel Reeves, the Labour Party do it. They're doing it kindly. They have different reasons for doing it. They have to do it rather than want to do it. All this old cobblers that gets wheeled out. Brian's in Gloucester. On a point of tax, or council tax in particular. Brian, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. The council tax has been chewing me up for weeks. I said on a council meeting last week, and I did see that if you've got a property and it's not rented out within a year, they want to double the tax.
Yep.
Up to 5 years, triple it. I sat on a local council meeting in the Forest of Dean, and I asked the woman that was on the chair, the district council at the time it was discussed, I said, what is it to you if people have worked and they got a property? Me and the wife bought ours, made redundant, we bought another property, it's being rented out. And I said to her, what's it to do with you, what people have worked for? I said, I understand from day one now, if your property's empty, you pay council tax. I said, that's how it is. I said, who are you to double it or triple it? And I said, have you got another property? Didn't answer. So then I said to her, are you a communist? They just hate to see you have anything. What's the matter with them?
You went straight for the C word. I like it. Did you get any answer, though? I mean, as to what it has to do with them? Because it's a perfectly fair question.
One person in there piped up and said, I have another property. He was a council member. I'm not. Member of the public. I think they call me thorn in the side. But when I saw that was really bad. But this councillor, not being funny, she hasn't got anything. So who are they to make these decisions?
Yeah, and the more you think about it, it's not only preposterous. I mean, in any other world, you just laugh about it. Go, well, you buy another house, someone's going to tax you twice on it. What's the reason for that? But actually, when you stop and really think about it, Brian, it's obscene. I mean, it's criminal that in a free democracy in the 21st century, the system would be demanding taxation from you for the audacity of having a second property.
My first part of the question I asked, it's Farsadine. Are the accounts so financially stable? Yeah. Why have you done this? Why have the bins gone up 13% plus?
Yep.
What are you doing?
Well, they don't know what they're doing. I did read some figures today, and I haven't got them to hand, unfortunately, but it was how much some local authorities will earn extra from doubling the council tax on those people with additional homes. I mean, it was millions for some of these authorities, so that's why they're doing it, but they can't seem to get beyond how utterly obscene this is, and it's symbolic of something, I don't even want to think about in terms of the system we live within.
Well, they seem to be banking the money before they need it. I mean, the other one is, I thought, well, why can't they wait for me to die and then get it out of the tax?
Well, yeah, if they have to have a tax, do it then.
Yeah, we started with nothing. I mean, I still do work. I'm 73 in July because I want to for myself. But they just hate to see you have anything.
Yeah.
They're going to kill the country. And as far as the tax on the cars next month, that's going to hit hell out of everything.
You're not wrong, Brian. It's a grim analysis, but it's where we're at. Thank you very much indeed for that. I was also talking to somebody about, it just reminded me, talking of stamp duty and if you buy so you're going to buy a property that you're going to knock down and build another property on it because the one that's there is inhabitable. Okay, so you wouldn't have to pay stamp duty on that because you couldn't inhabit it. However, HMRC will fight tooth and nail to prove that it is habitable, even if it's falling down and got, rats living in there and God knows what else. Because to define something as being literally uninhabitable is actually quite hard to do. So I get it. Like, you couldn't just buy a house, a decent house, go, I'm going to knock it down, build a new one, pay no stamp duty. That would be fraudulent, even if we agree stamp duty is fraudulent in itself. But that wouldn't be right. But if it genuinely is uninhabitable, they will still challenge it. And if, after a prolonged process, they establish that despite all of your evidence, the photographs and the surveyor's report, the fact that it's got damp, the fact that it's got rats, the fact that it barely exists, if you blew at it, it would fall down. Despite all of that, so they come to the conclusion, actually, it is habitable, this place, okay, so you will have to pay council tax, okay, with interest. Sorry? With interest? Yeah, you've got to pay the interest from the period that you didn't pay the council tax from. There's interest on it. Well, so there's interest because I challenged it. Yeah. Now that to me is another great example of statism absolutely in full throttle. They couldn't just say, yep, we won the case, you lost the case. You could put your hands up and go, well, fair enough, gave it a go. You wouldn't be happy, but no, there's interest on it as well. And it's that kind of thing, isn't it? It's those little areas of life that make you absolutely question what kind of system you're living in and living under. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you in a few moments. Oh, this one in from Frank, by the way, on the cost of a pint. On the beer front, back in 1973, I paid 11p for a pint of Alpine Eingebrow lager at my local Liberal club. 4 pints of lager and a packet of crisps, and I got change from 50p. I mean, you can't get your head around this. This is 73, not 1873, 1973. Earning 16 quid a week in those days. So let's not get carried away. Enjoy the show. Frank, thank you very much. Frank in West Yorkshire. Incredible. I mean, I don't know where that sits with other areas of inflation, but it is sort of food for thought, or beer for thought, that you could get 4 pints of lager and a packet of crisps and get change from 50 pence. Man alive. Just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Back to your comments and calls in just a couple of moments. So let's have a look at this. Interested about facial recognition. Now, we know the Met Police will deploy permanent live facial recognition cameras in Croydon. This is a UK first. They've done sort of pilot schemes of this before. This is to scan for wanted criminals. 2-year pilot, 500 arrests. The fixed cameras will operate from the middle part of this year. Let's speak to policing, crime and justice commentator Danny Shaw on this point. Afternoon to you, Danny. Good to have you with us. I mean, there's an obvious argument around this. We're familiar with the privacy Big Brother kind of comments that naturally follow this around. Before we get to that, I mean, in terms of the success, it's being heralded as a success. So I suppose the short answer is, well, if it catches bad guys, what's not to like?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that it has been a huge success in the Metropolitan Police. In last year alone, they made over 540 arrests of wanted suspects. So people who were wanted for anything from shoplifting to rape. They arrested people, 50 people who were suspected of violence against women and girls offences, domestic abuse, stalking, and 50 sex offenders who were allegedly in breach of their conditions. That strikes me as pretty successful. And there have also been deployments in South Wales. As we know, they use it for the Six Nations rugby tournaments at the moment this year. In Suffolk, police used it last month, Essex police. So a growing number of forces are beginning to use live facial recognition. I think the question, Ian, is around the costs of it and efficiency. I mean, if you deploy this technology for many, many hours and you make just a handful of arrests, is that efficient? It might be. You might say, well, it doesn't cost very much to deploy it, and there are more arrests than you would have if you had police officers deployed. Or it could be that the technology is very expensive to use and deploy it, and it's not worth it. So I think there are still questions about the cost effectiveness. But in terms of the argument about should we use it, absolutely we should, with the right legal safeguards in place, which I think we do now have.
And, of course, the argument against is, well, you could actually have a greater success rate of crime prevention and catching bad guys. Just stick a camera facing everybody's front door and then you're home and dry. We'd get everybody that way. And, of course, that would be seen as a horrendous infringement on people's privacy. But those that agitate and argue against it, Big Brother Watch and organisations like that, that is literally their point, isn't it? That, OK, you have some successes, but we now live in a world that is beyond anything that, I know, it's the Godwin's law of crime to mention Orwell, but, we're now literally living in that world.
Well, you have to balance people's right to privacy against our right to walk down the streets and not be mugged and not to be attacked by a sexual predator or anyone else. There's always a balance between privacy and security, right? If you go through an airport, you accept the fact that before you get on the flight, you're going to have to remove every piece of metal on you. You're going to have to step inside an X-ray scanner and so on, and potentially have someone going through all your luggage and your most intimate belongings. There are certain things that we accept to keep us all safe. Now, I believe that the safeguards are now there. The testing has now been done by the National Physical Laboratory, an independent scientific research organisation, which 2 years ago showed that there was no bias on grounds of age, gender or race at all by using live facial recognitions at the settings at which they're used by the police. No bias there. And so therefore you could now go full steam ahead and use these more widely. So, of course you have to balance certain things. There are CCTV cameras picking up our movements every single time we walk out onto the streets. I think we're the most surveilled country in existence. And yet we accept that. And I think it's about how the data is used. And with live facial recognition cameras, to be clear, a watch list of wanted suspects, people of interest to the police, is drawn up. If you pass those cameras and you're on the watch list, you're likely to be picked up and stopped and potentially arrested. If there's a match and it's and the camera's flagged that there's a match and you're not the one on the wanted list, yes, that there's a possibility of a false positive. But then I think it's all about how the police interact with you. There are very few false positives. There are some. But compare that to the number of people who are stopped and searched by police and nothing is found. So, there are always certain balances that have to be taken into account. But I think we're roughly in the right place now with this.
But of course, this is the start of it, Danny, isn't it? And the smart money would say, look, this technology is, I'm sure, hugely expensive. I mean, the idea of having a camera on your doorbell 20 years ago would have probably cost you about 12 grand. They're now about 50 quid, if that. So the cost comes down, therefore the experiment moves from experiment stage to standard policing practice, right? We're covered in cameras wherever we go.
I think in the future it will be. The body cam cameras at the moment, there will be a facility, I'm sure, that will not just capture that interaction when I arrest you, Ian, on the street if I'm a police officer, but will also scan your image and tell me exactly who you are. Are you on a watch list or not? So that facility, I'm sure, is coming. I think these cameras will be used more widely. It's about how the data is used. As soon as you walk through the camera, your face is scanned. If you're not on the watch list, that data is deleted from the database. That's really, really important. And the watch list is only sort of updated for every single deployment. So with the legal safeguards in place that I think there are, I think we can be assured that this is a really useful contribution to fighting crime. Hundreds of suspects were arrested in London using this technology, including people who I am sure would be walking the streets now were it not for live facial recognition cameras.
Yeah, that's a compelling argument. Listen, Danny, always great to have you on. Thank you. Danny Shaw, policing, crime and justice commentator. It really does stretch you from one point to the other, doesn't it? Because obviously if somebody says, look, we caught 500 sex offenders, then what's not to like? Living in a world where you are surveyed with regularity. I mean, this is the start of something. It will become bigger. So wherever you go, I mean, we know there's CCTV all over the place. Most of it is private. It's on the side of buildings. Now, of course, we opt for it. We stick it on our own doorbells. You can watch it on your phone. You can stick a camera. You look at the kind of stuff you can buy now. It's so cheap as well. That would have been thousands years ago. I mean, absolute thousands. It's kind of funny how that area, you do start to stick your tinfoil hat on a little bit when you consider that so much went into making doorbells with cameras on. You think, well, really? Is that going to be... If you took that to Dragon's Den, I don't know, 15 years ago, I'm not absolutely sure you'd get much investment, because I think people would perhaps say, well, who's going to want one of those? Really? I mean, if somebody's not in when you ring the... you miss a parcel, they leave the parcel. Or you pick it up at the post office like you used to back in the day. 0344 499 1000. If it catches, and this pilot scheme in Croydon led to over 500 arrests with some pretty grimy, grubby characters getting the cuffs put on them for some horrible offences, is that the only question you need to ask, I guess, when it comes to facial recognition and surveillance? If it catches bad people, therefore it's good. No other consideration. 0344 499 1000. Let's go to Phil in Hertfordshire. On this point, Phil, what are you thinking? Hello.
Good afternoon, Ian. I've got a question for the that representative from the police. How are they going to prove that they've deleted your facial recognition scan if you're not on any wanted list? It's just their word against others. They could be compiling a massive database of faces.
It's a great point. I guess the system is meant to work, and this is going to sound hilarious, Phil, it's meant to work on the basis that, well, why would they lie to us?
Exactly. Well, yeah, why would they lie to us?
Yeah, it's almost the stuff of a documentary, isn't it? In 20 years' time, we discover that there is a massive database of everyone because it wasn't deleted.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't like the sound of it, Ian. I'm sure that, people are going to turn around and say, oh, well, if you've got nothing to hide, what are you worried about?
Yeah, that's always
That's a fair statement, but there's many, many, many people that have got nothing to worry about, but they just don't want their data, and especially their images, logged. I mean, we know how leaky data is now. We have our bank accounts hacked.
Yep.
We have God knows what else hacked.
Yep.
You know, I can just see like identity fraud going through the roof with this.
But it's also, I think it's more than that, though, Phil. I mean, all of that is absolutely bang on. But do you want to live in a country where your government permanently surveys you? I mean, that is really what's happening here, isn't it?
I know, and you're absolutely right. And it's what happens in China now at the moment, isn't it? You know, if they cross the road and they've got like a red mark against them, their picture's up on a screen with a big red cross.
Yeah.
And this is people are sleepwalking into this.
As I said to Danny, if, you know, take this to its natural conclusion, we'll just have a camera facing everybody's front door. In fact, take it a bit further, you'll have one on the inside of your front door.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, well, there are people that think that Amazon and Alexa are already doing all that listening sort of thing, don't they? So, you know, are they 3/4 of the way there?
Yeah.
But yes, it's not good, is it, Ian? I mean, look, we have to fight for freedoms, and if you go through history and look how we fought for freedom in the past, and just for the sake of technology, we're giving it up.
And there it is. I mean, it's as profound as that. Listen, great points, Phil. I'm kind of with you on this, because I get it. If you catch the bad people, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? You've got the sex offenders and the horrible, the paedophiles, the rapists, the people who've robbed houses, you know, the worst of the worst. What do you pay for that? Constant surveillance. I think that is an interesting one. I've just been aware that Phil just inadvertently set off everyone's Alexa as well. I've just done it as well, haven't I? Alexa, yeah, it happens. Because you might not be listening to this on your Alexa. You could be listening to this on your phone or the TV. You've got an Alexa outside. Alexa, play the best of Christo. Don't worry, it won't do anything there. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. This is Talk.
People are not paying more income tax or national insurance in their pay slips. They're not paying more on VAT in the shops, especially as we still struggle with the cost of living crisis. But we've increased the national living wage for the lowest earning. We're increasing the triple lock amount of money that's coming through to pensioners, and inflation is coming down and is more stable. So all of these things are measures to try to tackle the cost of living crisis, to bring stability back to the economy. In fact, it's the first time in many months that wages have been going up quicker than the cost of the goods and services that we pay for.
UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
A lot of people are making the point, we were just discussing it here, if you wear a balaclava and there's facial recognition camera, and Finn, our producer today, was saying that he's noticed a lot of, well, you assume younger guys, but you don't really know, I guess, because of the, by definition, of the balaclava. But it's a bit of a kind of, it's a sort of an item of street clothing now. Stick your balaclava on. We know that there's some moody characters on bikes that will wear a balaclava and they'll half-inch your iPhone as a result. Facial recognition is not going to do anything there, is it? Because they'll just say we're looking for a man in a balaclava. Well, good luck. I mean, it could be anybody. This from Barry, who says they could make huge savings. We're talking about where would you slash spending. If they cut MPs' expenses, they are spending our money like water. Lammy, £7,500 on one lunch. I'm assuming it wasn't just for... I know he's a big lad, but it can't have just been for him. Hoyle and his 250,000 luxury travel. Rayner had a portrait, as did Hoyle. It's an outrage. They wouldn't be so quick if it was their own money, yet they are happy to cripple farmers and freeze pensioners. I totally despair. Great point, Barry. Yeah, I'd like to know who was at the Lammy lunch. It would be hilarious to discover it was just him in a beefeater. This is Tracy in Northampton. On Rachel Reeves. Tracy, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hiya. Well, I've got to tell you, first of all, about this balaclava business.
Yeah.
My husband went into a supermarket on Friday. As he walked in, there was two men that was behind him in balaclavas. They walked around the shop, and he just walked around gracefully getting what he had to get, and they were stealing stuff. He didn't want to get involved. And then all of a sudden, they went into the mobile shop inside this supermarket, and they ripped out every phone you could think of, and everything they could take. The staff tried, but they were overpowered by these two big men, and they walked out of this supermarket, and my husband just stood there with his mouth open. So that's what we're living in.
And how do you even get in the supermarket with the balaclava on?
Absolutely. And I said to him, where was the security man on the door? He said he was nowhere to be seen.
Of course he wasn't.
No.
In fact, I was outside an Apple store yesterday, and you can only imagine how much money's worth of kit is inside one of those.
Yeah.
And there is a security guard stands outside. I'm sure they've got one in every store, but I can't imagine what this one bloke would do if three characters in balaclavas went in, ripped out a load of laptops and all the other stuff.
He said
I mean, they couldn't do anything, could they?
No. My husband said you could not. They were like madmen. They ripped everything out of this shop and they just walked out of it. And he said, do you know what he said? I was in there, and he said, not even the police come while I was still in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a significant robbery, isn't it? You've not just stolen a tin of beans.
The funny thing is, the police station's next door.
You can't make it up. Talk to me very briefly about Rachel Reeves, Tracy.
Right, Rachel Reeves, right. With this ticket scandal, right? OK, do you know what? Any politician that gets given tickets, anything, right, instead of taking them, why don't they put them in a raffle and put them in a raffle draw
for a charity?
For charity, for somewhere in the country where it is run down, poor, and need that money to put into that.
That's a great point. That's a great point. You'd think there would be
politician should do that. Not take handouts.
100%. Tracy, thank you very much indeed for that. You know, I get it that once in a while, the Prime Minister goes to, a big do at the Albert Hall or Wembley or something. I can kind of partly see why once in a while you're going to have the head of your country at an event. But when you look at the hanger-oners who got Taylor Swift tickets, I don't know who else was on the Sabrina Carpenter hit list of freebies, but there's bound to be more than just Rachel Reeves. Before we go any further, it's the Voice of Doom. I think it's day four. OK, this is the, for new biz out there, this is the mystery voice, but with a political kind of angle, so it could be a politician or a former politician or somebody connected to the world of politics. Here's the voice.
Political decisions were taken.
I think it's quite hard. I think it's tricky. I'm not going to lie. I think this could run on for some time. Who is this?
Political decisions were taken.
Whatever you do, do not phone in because we don't have a prize at this end, all right? You can message in, however, if you fancy just taking part. 87222. If somebody comes up with the right answer, we will reveal all in about 10 minutes' time. If nobody does, it rolls over for day 5. Here it is again.
Political decisions were taken.
Any ideas? 87222. Gary says, it's an interesting exercise to speculate about what cuts to public spending Rachel Reeves should make on Wednesday to try to deal with the embarrassing fiscal position she finds herself in. But the truth is that we can't cut our way out of the economic problems we have, nor can we grow our way out of them. We are in a mess because the last 20 years, UK PLC has been running a flawed business model relying on cheap imported migrant labour to grow the economy rather than growing it in the right way by improving productivity through investing in technology, training, automation and infrastructure. It's a staggering fact that in real terms, i.e. allowing for inflation, our economy is about 20% smaller than it was 20 years ago. But we've got 10 million more people here. So GDP per capita, which is the measure of how efficiently our economy is being run, has collapsed. That's the root cause of all of our economic woes in a nutshell. But not only can nobody in Labour or Conservative see it, they all seem to want to do more of it. Yeah, they do, because they can't. They're hooked on the Kool-Aid of cheap labour. It's exactly that. It seems to answer a problem. It doesn't actually answer a problem. It creates a bigger one. But the bigger one, you can hide those stats for 20 years down the line, as Gary says. But in the meantime, oh look, unemployment. There we go. Hardly got anybody unemployed. We've got loads of jobs available. GDP, how's that looking? Yeah, let's not worry about that just yet. This will be Paul in Newport. What have you got for us, Paul?
How are you doing, Ian? Good to speak to you again, my friend.
You too, far away.
Just a couple of points, just to bring a bit of sort of light-heartedness to it. Do you remember Harry Enfield's the old miserable gits,
Yeah.
And to get into that very unique category, you had to be sort of 65, 70, and you'd lived a bit and this and the other. I reckon with everything changing as quickly as it is, and therefore, the history that we remember as kids is disappearing. So when they used to go, I remember this. I can remember when all this was fields. But that was last year, mate. That was last year. It's got like 20 years ago when you used to go fishing down there with a Marmite sandwich.
Yeah.
That was last year. And the other thing again, I have to chuckle, right? You know this, like the public surveillance stuff.
Yep.
I just have this vision in my head. So the old copper comes along and he's hooked you up onto his cam and he's hooked onto the internet. He's going, well, all right, sir, you may look a bit shady, but I've checked the driver and vehicle records, nothing there. The criminal investigation, nothing there. But the social media monitoring department, I see there are 437 pictures of your private parts.
That's a great point. Well, it might not even be your bits and pieces. It could just be 467 tweets that you put out there.
I've got 470 pictures of your dinner.
Yeah, I wonder what you're going to say then, but yes. Love it, Paul. Thank you very much indeed for that, Paul in Newport. He makes a good point, actually. It's a far deeper point than from what I think he first realised. The social media. You've been caught tweeting in a way that we don't like. We've got a great story of cancel culture coming up in the next section. It's off the flipping scale, if you haven't heard it. It involves a nurse. Julia was talking about it a little earlier. We'll get into that one in a few moments. And, of course, will we get an answer to day 4 of the Voice of Doom? Here is the voice.
Political decisions were taken.
If you think you know who that is, 87222. That's where you'll find us. Meantime, we'll be back with you on the phones, 0344 499 1000. First, though, let's get the latest news headlines at 3 o'clock.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It's indeed. I was about to say it's indeed the voice of doom. It is indeed the Afternoon Empire. It is indeed the voice or the home of common sense. Lots to get through in this section, of course. We are busy at this end, and we've been talking, as you'll be aware, of Keir Starmer's plans to cut civil servant numbers. Rachel Reeves targeting £2 billion in savings, but by 2030, where does that really get us? Starmer says cutting costs will improve services. Unions are not very happy. Also this afternoon, Heathrow Airport faced backlash after 200,000 passengers were stranded during Friday's power failure. Now, the National Grid says the airport actually had enough electricity, but it wasn't utilised. In the meantime, the boss of Heathrow actually went to bed, had a bit of a kip while this was still unfolding. We'll look at that next. And finally, a Christian nurse could lose her career for refusing to call a male child sex offender a woman. Jennifer Mel from Croydon says she was racially abused and threatened, but her NHS trust has sided against her. Against her. This is what we're dealing with here. We'll have more of that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. So, the voice of doom. This was day 4, the mystery voice with a political angle to it. Here's the voice.
Political decisions were taken.
Who is that? These are some of the answers. David Cameron. That comes up every day at the moment. David Cameron. It is not. Chris Whitty. No. Seb Coe. It isn't. Ian Duncan Smith. No. Charles Walker. No. Larry Grayson. It is not. One of the finest camp comedians ever. Larry Grayson, by the way. Lord David Frost. No. Oliver Letwin. It is not. Lord Andrew Feldman. No. In fact, we do not have a correct answer. Now, I hope we get one this week, because I'm off after Wednesday for a week and a bit. So we'd like to see it go by then. Russell Quirk's going to be here for Thursday and Friday, and then David Bull the following week. But it will return probably after that. So can it go in the next 2 days? Find out tomorrow at around about 2:45. Now, Heathrow boss Thomas Welby sparked an outrage by going back to bed during the power substation fire, leaving his deputy to close the airport at 1:44 a.m. Critics have called his actions irresponsible in a crisis. Couple of voices to speak to here in a moment. Paul Charles, the CEO of the travel consultancy agency. But first, Dave Mason, crisis consultant and the author of Handling the Media in Good Times and Bad. And nice to have you back on with us, Dave. And this would certainly be bad times if you're running an airport.
It would. Great to be back on with you again, Ian. Can I have a quick go at the mystery voice, by the way?
Give it a go, but I won't be able to confirm or deny. Go on, try.
Lord Gus O'Donnell, voice of God.
Lord Gus O'Donnell. OK, we're going to stick that in the pending file, if that's all right. You never know. So what are we making of the not so much the mystery voice, but the mystery CEO and what the hell happened on Friday at Heathrow?
I might surprise you with my perspective on this and others, and say it's okay in a crisis for a CEO to get rest and go to bed, because you can be talking about sheer operational disaster if they don't. They're no good to anybody if they actually can't function because they've been up for 48 hours. And my understanding of the situation between the two gold commands at Heathrow Airport is that they had exactly that. If you have a resilient executive team of capable people, which is exactly where you want an organization like that to be, then you do need to flip and flop. It's only like two pilots flying a plane and one going to the back for a kip. The bigger issues for me with this are the crisis planning, the business continuity, which is a science, not a perfect one, but it is a science nonetheless. And that is the actual crisis planning that went into deciding how alternative power supplies would work, if indeed they did, through such things as crisis simulation, training exercises, and ensuring worst case scenarios were properly planned and tested for resilience. Now, lots of businesses post-COVID, of course, have really had their focus on business continuity training and crisis simulations, something I work a lot in and do a lot of with organisations. Our minds have been focused since COVID in doing a lot more of this as organisations. So if you can imagine a situation where we're told statistically air travel is one of the safest forms of flight, air accidents are very rare things, that still doesn't mean air accidents never happen. So for this to be 99% secure that, you know, that the power source here is very unlikely to take the whole airport out, that still leaves you with that bit of, well, we should still plan for it in the same way we would plan for an air disaster. So my main concern is actually that not that he went to bed, but that they didn't actually plan for this as robustly as they could have in the first place.
I mean, just 2 points on that, Dave. And I know what you're saying. You know, you can't expect the boss to be Superman and stay awake for a week. I mean, that would be weird. And I would maybe be slightly more understanding of your point if it was sort of day 2. But you might think on day 1, look, I know the deputy has to be as skilled and as across it as the boss and various others on sort of similar levels. But it was the same day. I mean, it was coming towards a kind of conclusion maybe at that point. Would it not have been in the interest of the kind of PR, if you like, for him to sort of be constantly there, giving updates and being seen and being in control when something as seismic as this, which of course didn't just have a few implications for those who live in the area or those that happen to be in Marbella. I mean, this was a global knock-on effect.
It was. We don't run Heathrow Airport, so we don't know. But to hear that they have 2 Gold Command teams where they can operate this way is reassuring. Let me give you an example, but by way of a classic crisis scenario that we use as one of those textbook cases almost of how not to do it from a number of years ago. Do you remember the BP Deepwater Horizon? And this is written out in books, and it's almost your classic 101 of crisis communication. For anyone who's listening to this thinking, you know, questioning maybe what I'm saying and going, hang on, what's this guy talking about? Tony Hayward was the boss of BP, and he had been dealing with that horrendous crisis with Deepwater Horizon scandal. And I am reliably informed that he had been up all night at the coalface doing exactly as you're suggesting, no rest, no sleep. He was then put out in front of NBC News and the media to give an interview which was going to go global. And what do we know about what happened next? He was not fresh. He'd been up all night. He'd been right at that office dealing with this crisis. And he went in the media and said the words, "Nobody wants this crisis to be over more than I do. I'd like my life back." Those 5 words cost him his job and BP its reputation for many years. So one slip as a result of not going home to bed and not being fresh in this situation, it can be more damaging to every aspect of the operation than actually saying, you know what, boss, we've got this, go home, have a kip, come back fresh in the morning. I wasn't there. I didn't see what time he got in the morning, but Thomas Waldboy from the press reports, it suggested, was at his desk by 9 a.m. Now, I think that's a little tardy. He could have got in at 7:30. He could have got up a bit earlier.
Well, for £3.5 million a year, whatever it is, he should definitely have been at his desk at 6 a.m.
I think there's a reasonable question here as to whether he got to work on time that next morning. But I stand by this idea that if you have a good, resilient organisation with a proper plan and a really good goal command, there is no reason why people at the top can't go home for a decent rest so they can come back fresh. The second, so that's the second thing. The third aspect I have to this is the crisis comms bit where I kick in. And when he did come back and gave an interview with a colleague of yours on another radio station, Emma Barnett, she asked him if he might resign or should consider his position. And what is, I think, utterly unacceptable is the media training he's received. He just used the words, no comment. I can't comment about that. When I'm doing media training or crisis media training, which is an entirely different branch of this discipline, the first thing you train a leader in when you're doing simulations of this kind is in being able to answer the question, will you resign? Yeah. Are you going to consider your position? It's actually a really easy one to answer. And I was just
yes, I heard it too.
In my head again going, how can they say no comment to such an easy question as that? It does beg a question of the kind of training and simulation that he'd been receiving, whether by an agency or whether in-house, to actually put him through his paces and help him to answer questions transparently and robustly.
Maybe it was the former boss of BP that was doing the media training for him. I don't know. You know, there is that possibility, I suppose, Dave.
Good luck there, then.
Brilliant. Dave, great to have you on again. We will speak again soon, I hope. Dave Mason, crisis consultant, author of Handling the Media in Good Times and Bad. Let's get a word from Paul Charles, CEO of the Travel Consultancy Agency. Afternoon to you, Paul. I think you have a slightly different view on this idea that he couldn't stay awake. I maintain the position that I put to Dave there, that if this was day 3 of the crisis, I might understand it. But, I mean, it was only like 12:30 at night or something, so not exactly. And at a point when it was coming to what appeared to be a little more understanding of what had gone wrong.
No, you're absolutely right, Ian. I'm afraid Dave is wrong on this. At the start of a crisis, you need decisive action by the leadership. You need a CEO who's seen to be in charge, who's making the tough decisions, not leaving them to their number 2 at that point. This was a unique moment in Heathrow history. The last time it was closed for such a length of period was 2010 during the Icelandic ash cloud. And he should have been there at the start. This was 11 o'clock at night as the fire broke out, when you couldn't have known the impact of that fire at that point. Therefore, when you're leading an organization, you need to be leading from the top, not going home for the night and coming back to it in the morning, because clearly the fire changed overnight whilst he was asleep. And
exactly.
That's when you need your best leadership minds. I agree with Dave, maybe day 2 or day 3, of course you need to rest your teams. But in the first hour of any crisis, the decisions you take as a leader will determine how long that crisis lasts. And it could have been ended with Heathrow opening much earlier than it did.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, there's more than one facet to this. There is the question of whether the CEO should have gone to bed, but also whether the airport needed to. I mean, clearly flights wouldn't have been able to take off in the same way. There was nothing to do with him or there was a fire, genuinely, very close by. That's naturally going to affect air travel. But the idea that the whole airport went into kind of lockdown, nothing worked, the lights were off, they couldn't make a coffee, the lifts were shut, etc. When we now learn, according to the National Grid, this didn't need to happen.
Absolutely. The National Grid are right on this, and they know how much power is being produced and how much access that power had with Heathrow Airport. Heathrow could have turned on power earlier because it had access to it. And it still beggars belief that it put in place a 24-hour effectively stop on operations right from the outset, rather than saying we're going to put a 12-hour stop and we will update after 12 hours, which would have been more beneficial not only to airlines, but also to the 250,000 passengers who were affected by this. Yeah, it's I'm afraid, seemingly Heathrow is doing more than the National Grid on this occasion, despite the fact that Thomas Wolby, as CEO, in that interview you referred to, blamed the National Grid on Saturday morning, and that's why you've seen the National Grid hit back with the accurate facts.
Yeah, and I also wonder, and slightly hear me out on this, Paul, but I mentioned it earlier, I wonder whether, if we hadn't had COVID, I don't think that airport would have been locked down. I wonder whether there was an instinctive reaction where the human mind went straight to the template of disaster and said, it's big, it's a problem, lock down, and was almost kind of tacitly addicted to that being the default position. Something bad has happened, we must lock down.
Well, safety would have been their foremost concern, there's no doubt, but I detect there was an element of panic on the part of the chief operating officer, allegedly. We don't know the full facts, but I suspect there was an element of panic, thinking the fire's getting worse, the CEO is asleep and not to be bothered till the morning, I need to make a decision to give visibility and certainty to airlines whose planes are taking off from as far away as Sydney and Asia and obviously the Caribbean and America. But what they should have done is essentially keep or try to keep some of the terminals operating, because it seems they could in some way. Terminal 5 and Terminal 3, for example, where there was power accessible at that point. And then they would have phased in a reset. But instead, they just put a stop on everything and said, we will reopen hopefully in 24 hours' time. And that wasn't the right approach.
Do you think any heads will roll over this? Invariably, it's usually some minion further down the line rather than the head honcho.
Well, I think we know there are 2 inquiries going on. One is an internal one by Heathrow, by Ruth Kelly, the chairman, and deputy chairman, and one is by the government and the energy inquiry. And, you know, the thing about Heathrow is it has some very tough shareholders in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar who are used to running airports very well and very effectively. And I think they would have been embarrassed by what's happened here. And that's not the way shareholders like to be treated. So I think they may have the last word.
Listen, Paul, fascinating stuff. Great to have you on. We'll speak again. Paul Charles, CEO of the Travel Consultancy Agency. Thank you to him. Thank you to Dave Mason, our previous guest as well. It's not just a national but an international embarrassment. I genuinely think there is something in the lockdown thing, the kind of almost word association now by some people. Disaster, lockdown. So ingrained was it within the fabric of our society during that horrendous time. And remember, there's still people today, just to go back to COVID, who will cite as Boris Johnson's worst ever decision, not that he locked down, that he didn't lock down sooner enough. I mean, we can look back and find that galling and rather unbelievable. But such is the nature of those that think that is your sort of default answer. I'm sure there's a disaster you could think of somewhere where a lockdown would be the only answer. I don't know, if they dropped some horrendous bomb and 20 million Russian soldiers invaded our soil, then you might want to lock your door. I get that. But I wonder with this whether the boss at Heathrow, Thomas Welby, was almost seduced. I don't think I almost think subconsciously, perhaps, that this is what you do. It's a disaster. We have to lock down. What's the deal with the national grid? What happened there? There was a lot of conspiracy theories went around as well. That, by the way, it's worth just a moment to mention the fact we were told, I say we were told, there was a suggestion on the day that the reason the backup was net zero based, so it had no diesel, no anything. Ed Miliband's super dream of net zero was alive and well in the backup technology for Heathrow, and therefore it wasn't good enough for this thing went like wildfire around social media. It went nuts on social media. There was no truth in this whatsoever, but it didn't stop half-wits from spreading it, sharing it and commenting on it. And the takeaway I got from that, I thought, whatever you think about Ed Miliband, and if you listen to us regularly enough, you know exactly what I think about Ed Miliband. I don't think he's been in office about 29 weeks. Even Ed Miliband's curious evangelism could not have built a net zero alleged backup system at Heathrow Airport in that time and without anybody knowing about it. You only had to ask yourself that question. Really? Heathrow is backed up by a windmill and a solar panel? Didn't happen. We'll file it under that. More from you on the way shortly. 0344 499 1000. Before we go any further, in fact, I'll tell you more about the Oasis tickets in just a bit, all right? Because every now and again I get a text from somebody saying, how do I win the Oasis tickets? I'll tell you in just a bit on that one. Right now, 3:20. This is Talk.
This is a really, really big issue, and it goes to the heart of this government's failure to have a plan. Remember, Mike, they said they had a plan. You know, we're going to control the boats, smash the gangs, all that sort of stuff. Like so many of the things that they said to get elected, that was all an empty promise. On day one, they scrapped the Rwanda deterrent plan. We've seen record levels of arrivals in small boats on their watch. And now they're starting to talk about having a similar plan.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Sarah, who says, great show. Interesting to listen to the crisis consultant Dave Mason. However, I really need to correct him on one fact. A two-pilot operation on an aircraft would not involve a pilot leaving the flight deck for a bunk rest on a flight. There would be at least 3 pilots so that 2 of them could remain on the flight deck at any time. From Sarah, brackets, pilot's wife, among other things. Yeah, I did wonder that, because I've been on enough aeroplanes. Would you spot the pilot at some point, go for a kip and not come back, or the co-pilot, whoever? Yeah, so you'd have to have two others there to facilitate that. Rob says, so we get rid of people we pay for in the civil service and put them on social security that we pay for. So what is the point? This is reference those being kicked out of jobs in the civil sector. Well, the theory would be that they would find jobs in the private sector. The problem there is if you make people redundant, they'll get a fat pile of cash as well. And the best people would find a job quite quickly, assuming it's in a similar area. Herbie is in Harrow on cutting spending. Herbie, what have you got for us?
Good afternoon, Ian. Well, the thing is, I think it's time for the government to say to foreign students, you pay up front. You do not come here and you expect to get it for free. You pay up front. And also, of course, the immigrants is another problem, which is ever increasing. And I think it's time for travellers to have a valid insurance to cover them for NHS, because it's all costing us money, Ian. Everything's been abused.
And it's abused because if you come here from another country, I think you're in theory, I mean, obviously the EU thing, when we were in it, would have had a different arrangement, but you are meant to pay for your healthcare if you use the NHS.
Yeah, but that's not happening. Nobody asked for your credentials to see whether or not you're entitled.
There was a freedom of information thing a little while back where they looked at how much money hospital trusts had waived, basically, and said, we'll never get this back. I mean, it was multiple millions.
Exactly. Well, Ian, the problem is that in America you have to have a travel insurance to cover you. Well, it'll cost you a fortune because if you haven't got the money, you don't get treated anyway.
Yeah.
But the thing is, how much is it costing the taxpayer for all these stupid ideas that nobody seems to want to take on board? Where's the backbone of the government to cover us, to protect us from wasting our money? It's our money, not theirs.
Yeah.
You know, they don't care.
And it gets forgotten so quickly when they're in opposition. You know, they are all big on statements about this is taxpayers' money. When they're on the inside and you get removed. We had a guest on the other day who was, I don't know if you heard it, Herbie, but he was a former advisor to Boris Johnson during all that time at Downing Street. And he said, and he was very honest appraisal, he said, when you're in Downing Street, he said, you're in there for such long hours, you're kind of, it's like being in a submarine, he said. You are divorced from reality.
Well, they've been divorced from reality for a long time.
Yeah,
indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like they've got no idea of the real life and the real world that's going on. It's time that we got to stop all this pandering to these people and letting them get away with it, because it's costing us dearly. We're suffering ourselves. They're not suffering, but we are. I mean, say the asylum seekers have got it made, absolutely had it made, and yet all these students coming over not paying the bills, and when they get medical treatment, they're not paying the bills. It's you and I again picking up the tab.
100%. Herbie, it's a great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. This one came in from Ian. Reference saving money. How many levels of government are duplicated in local councils? Why don't they get rid of local councils, especially one big bit called the Mayor of London? He's a waste of time. Good. You're absolutely right. The repeated bureaucracy, in fact, the levels of representation. When you think about it, you have, in your own neck of the woods, you've got parish councillors, who are largely volunteers, and thank goodness these guys are there because they attend those, well, I'm sure are sometimes fairly laborious meetings. My neighbour sometimes nips along to one to check out what's happening, and it's worth it in a way because he usually comes back with a story about road markings and double yellers and all manner of other things. And you only find that out by taking notice. So you've got parish councillors, then you've got your town council, and then you've got your county council. Then you've got all manner of regional bureaucracies knocking around. Then you've got your MPs and you've got your Lords, and we used to have MEPs as well. I mean, man alive. We crunched the numbers on that once. I can't remember what the figure was. It was absolutely extraordinary how many individual people there were supposedly in a position of representation of an area, a region, a group or whatever. Curious. Mark's in Carlisle. What have you got for us, Mark?
We don't have to save all these savings if he does what he said he was going to do before the election. Go after the non-doms. There's 86,000 houses empty, sitting in London, registered to offshore companies. We don't know their names. 15 years ago, I got a list of 3,000 of their names, and we used to break in the houses, get possession of them, and get them into court and name and shame them. I've still got that list. Do I have to get my list out again?
Is it non-doms, though, Mark, that's the problem, or just people who are a bit creative with the... I mean, a non-dom, it's become a very damning phrase to use, you know, but a non-dom, you know, would say, well, you know, I pay my tax. I just don't pay more tax than I need. I pay my tax in the country of origin, and I pay some tax here. I just don't pay it all here. There's nothing illegal about that.
All the dodgy ones use the non-dom status to abuse the system.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
And they just plonk 20 million on a Belgravian townhouse, just like a bank, of ill-gotten gains, and no one checks where it's from. No one checks who owns it, who's behind the trust. When we got the list, we used to get them into court. I was threatened. It got a lot of publicity 15 years ago. I was in world press. I was on TV. I was on The Big Question, all that kind of thing. But no one has done anything since. He promised to do this.
Didn't they do it with the Russian oligarchs a bit?
Yes, that was sanctions.
Yeah. But they also what's the word? Impounded. Is that the right word? Bank accounts and various other goods, didn't they?
Yes, they did, because of sanctions. Nothing to do with the non-dom. With the stroke of a pen, you could raise hundreds of billions at 45%, tax them assets which are sitting empty in this country.
So how many of these big Belgravian mansions are there, though, Mark?
In Westminster, there's 3,061. In Belgravia, there's 312. In London alone, there's 86,300 and something. In the whole country, God knows what.
There's 86,000 non-dom mansions in London?
Not mansions. Some are just small flats.
OK.
They're not all £20 million mansions.
Yeah, yeah.
We did next to Margaret Thatcher. I met her. And what do you call it? The square where she lived was unbelievable. The amount of shenanigans going on in that square. Even her £35 million house got sold for $4 million. What's that about?
It's a good question. Yeah. I wonder what the story is there. Listen, Mark, great food for thought. It's another facet, though, as to why. In fact, I think that was Mark in Carlisle, by the way. I think we should do... You know, there's an organisation called Patriotic Millionaires. Can we get this going tomorrow, Finn? I think we need to... These are the people that are arguing you should pay millionaires. In fact, Dale Vince is one of them. He argues that anyone... Is it worth over or earns over? One of the two. 10 million should pay just 2% above the 10 million. OK, so we're not going to take your 10 million. It's 2% above your 10 million, which would raise collectively... I can't remember what the number was. It was like 40 billion or something. It was crazy, crazy money. And there is an organisation... So that's one theory. There is an organisation called Patriotic Millionaires, who are rich people who want to pay more tax. And I don't think you can voluntarily do it. You can't just send a load of money to HMRC and say, I want to pay more tax. I think, if you want to be benevolent, you've got to give it to, a hospital or a hospice or something. We might cover that tomorrow. I think it's a genuinely interesting one. I know there's a lot of economists out there going, not that old one again. It looks like you could make loads of money out of rich people, but there ain't enough rich people. True or false? Find out in this place tomorrow, maybe, on the programme. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Talk 25 to 4. And what about this? An NHS nurse faces losing her job for refusing to call a male paedophile she. Critics accuse the NHS of prioritising gender ideology over staff beliefs. Surely not. The nurse, Jennifer Melee, has launched a legal case against her treatment. Let's speak to free speech advocate, producer at the Battle of Ideas, and a bit of a go-to on these stories, Mo Lovett. Afternoon to you, Mo. I often use this analogy. Sometimes you have to read a story twice because you think, well, no, that surely isn't right. I must have missed something in the detail there, but I read it twice, and I think I read it 3 times. I would say of all of these kind of stories we see, and we see, sadly, too many of them, this is possibly one of the worst.
Absolutely. So this is a 6-foot-tall transgender woman, patient X, they're calling him, and I won't get sacked for misgendering somebody, who was admitted to hospital with, get this here, a urinary problem. Okay, so one of the possible treatments for that person was the fitting of a catheter. Okay, so let's just think about how important biological sex is in that instance.
Good point. You couldn't make that bit up of the story, really, could you?
No. And when the nurse phoned the doctor to ask for advice, she accidentally or just according to her own beliefs misgendered this person, and he then called her the N-word, black nurse, 3 times. And then tried to attack her and was violent and abusive to her. And who's the person that's under investigation by the NHS, that's lost shift work, who's initially suspended following the investigation, was asked to write statements without any legal representation. And wow. I think one of the other things about this story, Ian, that you can't go and say, this was a convicted sex offender who had been brought out of prison into the hospital for this treatment. This is a thoroughly nasty guy on most people's readings, and yet she's the one that's under investigation and under this terrible process where she's fighting for her job.
So not only do we have a sex offender whose crimes I think were trying to sort of procure young boys for a sexual nature, so this is a paedophile, sex offender, we also now know violent and also a racist, just to throw all of those things in. Apparently that's all okay, but don't you dare misgender this absolute violent, sexual, deviant Fruit Loop, because, you know, you might well find yourself losing your job, and that's exactly where this nurse has found herself. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
And according to Jennifer's own words, you know, they seemed completely unconcerned that she'd had this racial abuse hurled at her and that she'd been treated so badly by a patient. And I think she's always said, you know, the patient comes first. Well, of course they do. That's why she's a nurse in the first place. But the NHS have just put no, or the hospital, shall we say, have put, you know, no concern for her, the nurse, and what she's been through. You know, she's a Christian. And she says her Christian belief has got her through this, but it's also meant that she has absolutely refused, because you know, the hospital asked her, you know, if it happened again, will you conform now and call a transgender person she, transgender woman she? And the nurses said no. Jennifer Melly said no, I won't. It's against my belief. And you know, I think whether you're Christian or not, I mean, you know, if you're an evolutionary biologist, you would say that it would be against your beliefs to call a man a woman. You know, it is free speech, right? I'm a free speech advocate. It's also freedom of conscience. You know, I'm not going to believe that a man can be a woman, because I don't.
Yeah.
And I won't be forced into it.
And what saddened me as well about, I mean, it actually infuriated me, Mo, to be honest, but you kind of get to a point where you read so much of this, you sort of go to another sort of phase, and it's sad and it's extraordinary and it's confusing, because, you know, if you'd had this conversation with anyone 15 years ago, people would have thought we were, you know, lying, that these situations don't exist. It would be ridiculous. But here we are, and there are many of them. I had thought we might be slightly turning a corner, and I don't know whether I'm basing that on maybe what's happening in America and a few other countries around the world. Germany, I think, of, you know, and they've been absolutely evangelical over this stuff. You know, they're the first to call the old bill if somebody writes something on Twitter. But, you know, I thought things were changing, but apparently not, certainly not at the NHS.
I mean, I think they are a little bit. I mean, it's the Trump effect, isn't it? One of the first things he did when he took office was to sign that bill into law about men in women's sports. So I think things are changing a little bit, and perhaps we're a little bit even on Turf Island, where we're a little bit slow to catch up. But there has also been, we should say, this piece of research published by Dr. Alice Sullivan this week, or last week rather, about how the data is being distorted in the NHS because of this conflation of sex and gender. Yeah. So much sexual, biological sex data is missing from our records, you know. Yeah. And it won't just be in hospitals, where obviously it's massively important. You know, I think there have been men who've come in with really bad, presented as male, come in with bad stomach cramps and had ovarian problems. And it's lucky that the nurse has been able to, or the doctor's been able to spot that this person could possibly not be a man as they're presented.
Well, indeed, and you wouldn't get your prostate check letter, you know, because you've been erased as a male from the database. And I mean, that's not just madness, potentially lethal.
I mean, I think one of the things we always do at the Battle of Ideas, you know, you're saying I was a producer of the Battle of Ideas, and one of the things we always do is say that it can't just be about the law, and it can't just be about the institutions. You know, there has to be a public sort of backlash against this. There has to be a public belief in free speech and freedom of conscience, that we're able to kind of say enough is enough about this nonsense. Because far too many people aren't in the position of Jennifer, where they have their Christian faith. That means they just will not succumb to this kind of ideology, or lucky enough like me that I don't get sacked for it. There are a lot of people who just go along with it for an easy life because they need to pay the bills, and all the while all this damage is happening, particularly for young people who are being pushed into, you know, gender transition and all the rest of it. We know the horror stories already, so it needs more of us to speak up where and if we can, and not to, as you say, you see these stories and you just think, oh, not another one. But everyone is important, you know.
And as you rightly say, the sort of thumping irony of this story is the reason the patient was first in hospital was due to a catheter procedure, which would have been, intrinsically linked to his, maleness biologically and physically and all the rest of it. Again, you can't make it up, but these stories, sadly, are among us. Mo, always great to get your view on these things. Thank you, Mo. Love it. She's from the Academy, from the Battle of Ideas, a producer over there. I found this one disturbing because they're all disturbing, but this particular one, the woman's a Christian, and she was abused so badly by the patient, both physically. She said the patient got violent, used the N-word 3 times. Nothing's really being said about that from the end. I mean, you'd think the first response from the NHS would be, well, we can deal with whatever our gender rules are later, but first we want to be make sure that that Jennifer is okay, that she's protected. She was the victim of a crime. She was the victim of racist abuse. Let's do that first, because that's the most important stuff. And then we can get down to this kind of little nonsense about the fact that she misgendered a male paedophile who now calls himself a woman. And as a result, that was a very, very bad thing to do. The paedophile who had sexual offences against young boys, as I understand it. The patient's only known as Mr. X, so we have no identity of the patient, and maybe that's how it should be. But the patient was serving time in a high-security male prison as well, which is perhaps also relevant to this point. But the minute the nurse referred to the male from the male prison who has a penis as a bloke, all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose. What were you doing? You can't call her a bloke. Literally about to fit a catheter onto the penis. I think that's a bloke. The one from a male prison. Yeah, that one. Yeah, Speechless doesn't even cover it, right? Let's go back to the core phone in this afternoon. Richard's in Sussex on cutting spending. Richard, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hello, Ian. Good
Hi.
to speak to you.
You too.
I'm a big fan. Yeah,
thank you. That's very
much.
cool.
Yeah, cheers. Well, I personally would slap a even higher tariff on all the utility companies who are digging up the road, personally.
Oh, I'd love that.
Because basically, I mean, well, I've got a bit of a tick box, really. They all seem to be working from home. I don't know whether that's going to speed up pothole repairs and utilities and things, but they never seem to be there.
You can come up with your best pothole theories from a sofa. Didn't you know that, Richard?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently it's now scientifically proven.
Well, I'm in London a lot, and mostly I see these utility companies abandoned roadworks, basically. And if the council could basically, charge them a bit more, for a start, they might turn up to work. They'd probably be inclined to finish early because shareholders are involved. Logistics would be then speeded up, so that would save the country millions of pounds in idling engines, and while we're on the thread of that, then the air quality would improve. They're all foreign owned and everyone hates them anyway.
That's a very good point. What's not to like about what you've suggested? Do you know the strange thing is, I was just going to say, Richard, where I live, and I hadn't clocked this because I just hadn't been down this particular road, or if I hadn't noticed it, but it was a Friday evening about 6 o'clock, and I'm driving down this road, there's a massive tailback, and then I realised there's roadworks going on, but my first thought was, roadworks at 6 o'clock in the evening, that's on a Friday, that's never happened. You know, the water people, the electric, the gas, they don't do this kind of stuff. But they weren't doing any of that, they were actually building a cycle lane. So whenever there's if there's a cycle lane, clearly there's a far greater urgency than making sure that the residents have power, because they certainly don't come out in force when it's to do with your electric.
Well, that's the only thing that I would support Ed Miliband on, really. I mean, if he can do away with gas, he can do away with the gas work, and then he can do away with the gas repair.
It's a very good point. It's one less set of roadworks. Maybe that's the way he should be selling this.
Do you drive in London a lot?
I do a bit, but I haven't for a little while. I used to drive every day for, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, well, my regular route goes down the south of Fulham.
Okay.
And now they've just, I mean, there's all these flats and nobody's basically living there at all. And it's all cycle lanes. And I think it's a toss-up between, as regards that super sewer, I think the finishing rate is a sort of split tie between the super sewer and Barcelona Cathedral, don't you reckon?
I think you might be right. Richard, brilliant observation. Thank you for that, and your nice comments as well at the beginning. Really appreciate it. That's Richard in Sussex, 0344 499 1000. Before we continue, let's find out how you could win that pair of sought-after, very sought-after, I mean, they're like hen's teeth, these things, but we've got a couple of tickets for Oasis at Wembley this summer. Here's how.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
This is a really, really big issue, and it goes to the heart of this government's failure to have a plan. Remember, Mike, they said they had a plan, you know, we're going to control the boats, smash the gangs, all that sort of stuff. Like so many of the things that they said to get elected, that was all an empty promise. On day one, they scrapped the Rwanda deterrent plan. We've seen record levels of arrivals in small boats on their watch. And now they're starting to talk about having a similar plan.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is from Paul, who says, will the government need immigration when they sack 10,000 civil servants, put all the sick and disabled people back to work and all the elderly now going back to work to cover their heating allowance, and we won't need fruit pickers when Labour shut all the farms down? So maybe there is some method in the madness like it. On facial recognition cameras, Claire says, so we have all this super surveillance to catch the bad uns, but we can't put them away because the prisons are crammed full and can't accommodate them, or they get let out by a lefty judge because prison will cause them depression. It could be that as well. And they can't be deported if they're foreign criminals, of course, because that would be a breach of their desire to eat the correct recipe of chicken nuggets. H says, add 2% tax on the CEO of energy and water bosses. That might help. There's probably lots of areas you could genuinely tax more, because I'm not a fan of tax, and I think we should pay as little of it as possible. That's our public duty, to not give the state money that we're not meant to give them. But you're aware, there's another part of me that thinks, I feel, when you pay your tax bill, nearly fell off my chair when I got my one this year. But you do it. You go, OK, well, this is for the lights and the hospitals and the fire people and the police, and makes the country tick. But if you're not getting that service, you do royally scratch your head, almost drawing blood as you scratch, because you can't square the circle. Joe is in Hull on this curious story of the nurse and the transgender patient. Joe, what are your thoughts? Hello.
Hi, Ian, how are you doing?
Good as gold, thank you. Yeah, fire away.
Good. I just think it's a classic case of this country's gone bonkers.
Yep.
Where once again, the nurse, I feel for her. I think if I was her, I would have refused treatment. I think I'd have gone one step further, and I'd have gone to court with the NHS for the unfair disciplinary she's received. Just because a geezer identifies as a female doesn't mean a nurse has to accept that.
Well, indeed. And in this particular case as well, to be honest, Joe, looking at the details we know of this particular case, I imagine this is just some kind of twisted individual that identifies as various things depending on how his sexual preferences are working on that day.
Exactly. If we do not get a grip of this as a country, we are on a very slippery slope.
100%.
We need to grow a backbone. We need to take... I know the guy's a nutcase, but we do need to take Donald Trump's approach on it.
Yeah.
There's male and female. If we don't get a grip of this, I guarantee in 10, 20 years' time, there will be males on women and children's wards, and there's a clue there, women and children's wards, breastfeeding. That's where it's going to end up, Ian, if we do not get a grip of this. There was a story a couple of days ago about the influence Andrew Tate was having on these kids, which I was listening to. Now, these nutcases that are going into schools and teaching 7- and 8-year-old kids that it's okay to identify as whatever you like, they should be rounded up. It's bordering on child abuse.
Oh, 100%, yeah. These people should probably, in an ideal world, they'd all be in jail somewhere, but we haven't got any jail space. But
or in the funny farm, locked up for their own goods.
Yeah, no, they're absolutely nuts. There's 120 genders. Where they don't know this. They're not biologists. They didn't do some study. They just desire to think it. Joe, I've got to move for no other reason than time. Thank you to Joe in Hull. This in from Dean, who says, on saving billions, put Britain and its citizens first in all government spending. I'm not a phobic or an ist, which are the default positions, the change resistance movement, but any country which puts illegal entrants, who we know nothing about, in luxury hotels with all the attached whistle and bell entitlements, while leaving its pensioners to freeze, needs to look at its moral compass and dramatically change course. And I have 1,000 other ideas, but you're a busy man, says Dean. Love it, Dean. Thank you.
He doesn't know you then, does he? Where are you going on holiday on Thursday, are you?
Well, I'm away. I'm off from Thursday and then Thursday, Friday, and then the following week.
Really? Very interesting, because Mrs. Carl just announced as she dropped me off at the station that she's going away on Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
And I've got the kids on my own.
I know. Well, we thought you'd be the... Sorry, she thought you'd be the best, but not that I knew, because I haven't spoken to her, but the best babysitter, because being the dad and all that.
Yeah. What am I?
Sort of.
Sort of. You see, this is the whole issue, isn't it? What's the ish thing? What was that? What's this gender nurse thing? Because was this story?
Yeah.
I about 6 months ago, a midwife contacted us who'd been doing the job for 26 years, and she literally, I'm going to say, the baby came out, and she said to the parents, do you not know this story? Congratulations, you've got a baby boy. And they went, it's not up to you to identify our child. And she got a written warning. It's got a penis. I'm not being rude. It's a boy.
Because it's up to the parents to decide.
To decide what the gender of the baby is.
You don't know what gender the baby's going to be until it's grown up and decided.
Not with me. Not with me.
Not with me either.
Listen, I got goosebumps when Trump said there's two sexes. Sorry, seriously, honestly, I can't be doing with it. It's too much. So what's flowing today, as the actress said to the bishop? Surely it's the idea that the Labour Party are going to get rid of some civil servants. This is sort of on the one hand brilliant, isn't it?
It could be 10,000, it could be 50,000. And
the more the better.
If the Labour government can identify 50,000 people they don't really need, it tells you everything you need to know about the civil service.
Absolutely. I will also be talking about how Angela Rayner wanted to go on a safari when she went to Ethiopia.
Excuse me, can I see the lions, please?
Yeah. How a migrant got to stay in the UK because he was concerned that if he had to go back to where he should have come from, his autistic son would be too stressed, or the one who stayed because he'd lost his mobile phone. But most of all, I'm going to talk about Snow White. Have you heard about that crap film?
Well, there's a thing going on, isn't there?
Snow broke.
It's as woke as anything.